The blood reached the drain before anyone looked up. A man was dying on a gurney in the middle of Harlow General's trauma bay, and 6 medical professionals stood around him doing everything right and watching him slip away anyway. His pressure had cratered. His pulse was a whisper. The attending had called 2 interventions. Both failed, and the clock had run out of room to be generous. Nobody in that room had an answer. Nobody except the woman in the worn scrubs standing at the back wall, the one nobody ever asked, the one they'd spent 3 years pretending wasn't there. She'd seen this before. Not in a hospital. In the dirt, in the dark, with mortar fire overhead and a man bleeding out in her hands. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now and you love stories about real strength, quiet courage, and the kind of justice that actually means something, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I put out new stories every week, and I promise you do not want to miss what's coming. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Harlow General Medical Center sat on the east side of Delwood, Oregon, in that particular part of the city where the hospital was the tallest thing for 6 blocks in any direction, where the parking lot smelled like diesel and old rain, and where the staff entrance door had been broken for 11 months and nobody had fixed it. You pushed it with your shoulder. You learned that on your first week. Nora Callahan had been pushing that door for 3 years. She was 32, white, medium build, with the kind of face that looked younger than it was until you looked at her eyes. And then you revised your estimate upward by about a decade. She wore her dark hair pulled back in the same low knot every shift, drove a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked dashboard, and brought her lunch in a blue insulated bag that had a small tear along the zipper she kept meaning to replace. She was, by every visible metric, unremarkable. A floor nurse on the night rotation, someone you passed in the hallway and nodded to and immediately forgot. That was more or less intentional. She clocked in at 6:48 on a Tuesday in November, tucked her bag into her locker, and walked the floor with the particular quietness that had become her signature. The ward was doing that thing it did between 7 and 8, the gap between the last shift's exhaustion and the new shift's caffeine, where everything felt slightly underwater. Monitors beeped. Someone down the hall was asking for more blankets. The coffee in the break room had been sitting since 4 a.m. and smelled like a decision people were making anyway. Nora made her rounds, checked her patients, adjusted a drip, listened to a woman in room 14 explain, for the 3rd time this week, that she knew her own body better than any machine did. Nora agreed with her, made a note, and moved on. She had learned early that the best way to survive this hospital was to be invisible. The charge nurse for the floor was Sandra Voss, 44, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses she never actually used for reading, and a management style that could be described, charitably, as territorial. Sandra had been at Harlow General for 16 years. She had opinions about everything, and shared most of them, including opinions about Nora Callahan, which she had shared once with a colleague in the break room in a voice that carried farther than she intended. "She's competent," Sandra had said. "She's just not, I don't know, she doesn't fit. She's like a temp who forgot to leave." Nora had heard it. She'd poured her coffee and walked out without reacting. 3 years of that kind of comment had given her a very specific immunity. The ER was a different floor, technically not Nora's domain, but the hospital was short-staffed on the night rotation. It was always short-staffed on the night rotation. And at 9:15, she got pulled down to help manage overflow. She grabbed her things, took the stairs because the elevator was slow, and pushed through the ER doors into the particular controlled chaos of a Tuesday night in November. The attending on shift was Dr. Marcus Holt, 49, residency pedigree that he mentioned more often than necessary, the kind of physician who had been good at his job for long enough that he'd stopped questioning whether he still was. He saw Nora arrive, looked at her badge, and said, "Floor nurse? Fine. We need a hand in Bay 4. Patient's been waiting 40 minutes for a line check." "I'll handle it," Nora said. He had already looked away. She handled it. Then Bay 2, then a consult request that turned out to be a documentation error. She moved through the ER the way she moved through everything, efficiently, without announcement, without asking for credit. By 10 o'clock, she had done the work of 1.5 people and been thanked by nobody. That was around the time the ambulance came in. She heard it before she saw it. The radio traffic picking up, the automatic doors opening with a blast of cold November air, and the paramedics coming in fast with a gurney carrying a man who was very clearly losing the argument with his own blood pressure. "Construction accident," the lead paramedic called out. 38-year-old male fell from scaffolding, approximately 15 feet. GCS 12 on scene, dropped to 10 in transport. BP was 90/60, now reading 78/50 and dropping. We've got external trauma to the left shoulder and abdomen, possible rib fractures, bleeding controlled at the surface. Dr. Holt came in from the left, already pulling on gloves. The trauma team assembled around the gurney with the practiced choreography of people who'd done this hundreds of times. Nora stepped back to the edge of the bay, out of the way, which was where she was supposed to be. She watched. The man's name was Joel Bryce, according to the second paramedic rattling off intake information. He was still partially conscious. His eyes were open, tracking poorly, and he made a sound when they moved him that was less a word and more a signal. "Let's get a second line in. Push fluids. I want imaging ordered," Dr. Holt said. "BP's at 70/40s, a nurse called. "Then let's move. What are we seeing on the abdomen?" "Bruising on the left side, possible splenic involvement." "Get ultrasound." Nora was not looking at the abdomen. She was looking at the man's face, at the color, not pale the way blood loss made people pale, but a particular gray-white, the skin tight across the cheeks in a way that didn't match the external injury pattern. She was looking at the way he was positioned on the gurney, slightly favoring his right side without seeming aware of it. She was looking at his neck. She had seen this before. Not here. Somewhere with no lighting and no equipment and no backup, where the decision had to be made in about 4 seconds, or it didn't get made at all. The team worked. Fluids went in. The ultrasound arrived. Dr. Holt looked at the imaging and said, "Splenic contusion, left side, consistent with impact. Let's manage the pressure and see where we land." Nora stayed quiet. The monitor beeped. The blood pressure dropped again, 68/42. "He's crashing," someone said. "I see it. Push another bolus." Pressure's not responding. "Then we go to OR. Let's prep. The bleed isn't in the spleen." The words came out before Nora fully decided to say them. She hadn't planned it. It wasn't a strategy. It was the same reflex that had made her step forward in the dark, on her knees in foreign soil, when the junior medic beside her had been treating the wrong injury, and the man they were trying to save had about 90 seconds left. The entire trauma bay went quiet. Dr. Holt turned. He looked at her badge again. Really looked this time, reading the designation. Floor nurse, ER floater. He looked at her face, then back at the badge. "Excuse me?" "The external bruising is left-sided, and the ultrasound shows splenic involvement, but his pressure pattern is wrong for that injury alone. The way he's holding himself on the gurney. He's protecting his right lower chest, not his left upper abdomen, and look at his neck veins." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move forward. She just said it, the way you say a fact. "He's got a tension pneumo developing on the right side. The impact transferred. It's been building since the accident." Nobody moved. Dr. Holt's expression went through 3 things in about 2 seconds. Dismissal, irritation, and then something more cautious that he didn't like having. That's a significant claim for someone who... His trachea is deviated, slightly. Look at it. He looked. The respiratory therapist in the corner looked. The second attending, Dr. Priya Nambiar, who had come in 6 minutes ago and been standing just outside the bay, stepped forward and looked. The room shifted. "He's right-sided," Nambiar said quietly. "She's right. Look at the tracheal shift." What happened next took less time than the argument that preceded it. Holt made the call. Needle decompression, right side, second intercostal space. And within 40 seconds of the intervention, Joel Bryce's blood pressure began to climb. Not smoothly, not perfectly, but steadily, the numbers moving in the right direction for the first time since he'd come through the door. Nora watched from the edge of the room. She didn't move closer. She didn't say anything else. She had said the thing that needed saying, and now the doctors were doing what doctors did, and that was how it was supposed to work. She expected it to end there. It didn't. Sandra Voss appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay at 10:47, which meant someone had called her, which meant someone had made a call that a floor nurse had inserted herself into an ER trauma case. Sandra looked at the bay, at the stabilizing patient, at the team moving with renewed purpose, and then she looked at Nora. "Carter," she said, and then she corrected herself, which told Nora she'd been told the name by someone who'd checked. "Callahan, step out, please." Nora stepped out. The hallway outside the trauma bay was all fluorescent light and linoleum and the particular hospital smell, antiseptic over something older, something human that the antiseptic couldn't quite win against. Sandra stood with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked at Nora the way people look at something they've already decided about. "Walk me through what just happened in there." "A patient was crashing," Nora said. "The injury pattern suggested a secondary cause. I flagged it." "You flagged it." Sandra's voice had the tone of someone choosing their words specifically because they were the wrong ones. "You're not on the trauma team. You're an ER floater tonight because we needed an extra hand, not because anyone invited you to make diagnostic calls. The patient is being handled by the physicians whose job it is to handle him, which is not your job." Sandra unfolded her arms long enough to point at the floor. "Your job is patient support. Your job is following the care plan. Your job is absolutely not walking into an active trauma bay and telling the attending that he's treating the wrong thing." Nora looked at her. He was. The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long and felt considerably longer. "I'm filing an incident report," Sandra said, "and I'm pulling you from ER floater rotation, effective tonight. You'll go back to your regular assignment tomorrow, and we will have a formal conversation about scope of practice before the end of the week." "Okay," Nora said. Sandra waited for more. For an argument, maybe. For the kind of defensive response that would give her something else to work with. She didn't get it, which seemed to frustrate her more than the original incident. "That's all you have to say?" "I said what needed to be said in there," Nora said. "I don't have anything to add." Sandra left. Nora stood in the hallway for a moment, breathing the antiseptic air, and then she went back to work. She finished her shift at 6 a.m. She drove home in the dark, ate half a sandwich, and went to sleep. She didn't think about the incident report. She didn't think about Sandra Voss. She thought briefly about the way Joel Bryce's pressure numbers had turned the corner, 68 to 74 to 86, before she closed her eyes. She woke up at 2 in the afternoon to a voicemail from hospital administration. The voicemail was professionally worded. A woman's voice, neutral in the way that professional neutrality is its own kind of message. It said that Nora's employment status was under review following an incident report, that she was placed on administrative leave pending a formal evaluation, and that she should contact the HR department at her earliest convenience. Nora played it twice. Then she set her phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at the tear in the zipper of her lunch bag for a long moment. She had known this was coming. Not the exact form of it, not the exact day, but this. This particular shape of consequence, the one where doing the right thing in the wrong hierarchy cost you something real. She had known it the way you know a weather system is coming, not the exact hour, but the certainty of it. The way the pressure drops before the rain. She had been in this situation before. Different geography, different stakes, different uniforms, but the same basic structure. The person with the knowledge, sidelined by the person with the title. The correct answer, suppressed because the wrong person said it. She had learned in that other life that the correct answer had a way of eventually surfacing. The question was always what it cost to get there. She called HR back. She spoke to a man named Dennis Pruitt, who sounded like he had been through this particular conversation many times, and had developed a consistent script for it. He told her the review would take 5 to 7 business days, that she should not report to the hospital during that period, and that she would receive written correspondence about next steps. "Can you tell me what specifically is in the incident report?" Nora asked. The report cites unauthorized clinical intervention in an active trauma case and breach of scope of practice. The patient's blood pressure went from 68 systolic to 94 within an hour of the intervention. I can provide the chart numbers if that's... Ms. Callahan, the review process will consider all relevant... "I understand," she said. "Thank you for your time." She hung up. She went to the window. The November afternoon was the color of a bruise, a low gray sky pressing down over Delwood's east side rooftops, the kind of afternoon that felt like it was waiting for something. Her street was quiet. A woman was walking a dog down the block. A kid on a bicycle went past. Ordinary things. Nora watched them and thought about a village in a country whose name she couldn't say in the wrong context, where she had spent 14 months doing work that had no official title and left no paper trail, and where the training that she had brought back inside her had become so deeply embedded that she no longer thought of it as separate from herself. It was just how she saw things, how she read a room, how she read a body. She had tried very hard for 3 years at Harlow General to put that part of herself in a drawer and leave it there. She had managed it, mostly, right up until the moment a man's neck vein told her something that no one else in that room was looking for. The next 3 days were quiet, in the particular brutal way that enforced stillness can be. She ran in the morning. She cooked. She read. She did not call anyone because there was no one to call who would understand the specific texture of this situation, the way it sat under her ribs. Not panic, not anger, something more like the careful patience of someone who knows that things are moving even when they look still. On the evening of the 4th day, her downstairs neighbor knocked to say there was a man outside who had been standing near her building for 20 minutes. She went to the window. There were 2 of them, actually, standing on the sidewalk with the specific quality of stillness that she recognized the way you recognize a language you grew up speaking. Straight, alert, economical with their weight distribution. Not threatening, not hiding, just waiting, with the patience of people who had been trained to wait. She recognized the posture before she recognized the face. And when she recognized the face, she stood very still for a moment, her hand on the window frame, the November dusk pressing against the glass. Then she went downstairs. Captain Leo Drummond looked older than she remembered, which made sense because 3 years had passed and the kind of work he did aged people in the honest way. Not suddenly, just steadily, like erosion. He was 41 now, maybe 42, with the same sharp jaw and the same way of looking at a person that meant he was not just looking at them, but calculating about 15 things simultaneously. He wore civilian clothes. So did the man beside him, who Nora recognized as Sergeant Thomas Reyes, quiet, watchful, built like someone had installed a person inside a concrete frame. Drummond looked at her for a long moment in the way of someone who has been looking for something for a while and has just found it. "Callahan," he said. "Captain," she said. "You're harder to find than you should be." "I know. We've been looking for you for almost 16 months. The street was quiet around them. A car went past. Somewhere down the block, a door opened and closed. "We can't have this conversation out here," she said. "No," he agreed. "We can't." She looked at Tomas. He nodded once, which was his version of hello, and also his version of I know what you did. I was there, and it mattered. "Come upstairs," she said. "I'll make coffee." She turned and went back into the building, and the 2 men followed her, and behind her she could feel the weight of 16 months of something finally catching up. The thing she had been waiting for without admitting she was waiting for it. The thing she had been carrying so quietly for so long that she had almost convinced herself it wasn't there. The elevator was slow. She took the stairs. Her apartment was small and deliberately plain. A couch, a table, a kitchen that had exactly what it needed and nothing decorative. The kind of space that said, I live here, without saying anything about who she was. Drummond sat at the table. Tomas stood near the window, which was what Tomas did in rooms he didn't know yet. Nora made coffee the way she always made it. No ceremony, just water and ground beans and a cheap drip machine that took 4 minutes. She set 3 mugs down and sat across from Drummond and waited. "You left without a word," he said. "I know." "After the extraction, after the debrief. You signed your separation papers and you vanished." "I didn't vanish. I just stopped being findable." Drummond looked at her the way he had looked at terrain maps once, measuring, calculating, deciding what the ground was actually telling him versus what he wanted it to say. 16 months, Callahan. I had 3 people try to track you down through civilian channels. "And now you found me," she said. "So something changed." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "A few things changed." He paused. Tomas, tell her. Tomas turned from the window. He had a particular way of speaking, not sparse exactly, but careful, like someone who had decided that words cost something and he intended to spend them accurately. Martinez is alive, he said. Nora went very still. We got him back 4 months ago, Tomas continued. He wasn't KIA. He'd been in a detention facility in the eastern sector. We didn't know. The intelligence we had was wrong, and we didn't find out it was wrong until a source opened up last spring. She put her mug down. She put it down slowly enough that it didn't make a sound, which took something from her, the effort of that control. You told me he was gone. We told you what we knew at the time, Drummond said, which turned out to be wrong. I'm not here to give you a speech about that. I know what you carried out of that country. I know what you thought you were carrying. She looked at the table. Outside, the November wind found a gap somewhere in the building's old frame and moved through it in a low register, almost below hearing. He's okay? She said. Not a big question, just that. He's home, Tomas said. He's got a long road, but he's home. She nodded once. She breathed. She did not let whatever was moving through her chest reach her face, not right then, not with Drummond watching and taking inventory the way he always did. There would be time for that later, in private, where it belonged. That's one thing, she said. What else? Drummond leaned forward. Your record from the program was unsealed 6 weeks ago, partially. Enough that a veterans advocacy organization got wind of your service designations. Not specifics, nothing classified, but the tier of training, the operational context, the medical certifications. He looked at her steadily. And then someone from Harlow General filed a complaint with the state nursing board about a floor nurse who apparently diagnosed a tension pneumothorax in an active trauma case without a medical degree. Nora said nothing. The board pulled your file, Drummond said, and your civilian file doesn't match your actual training, not even close. You hold certifications that a floor nurse shouldn't have. Equipment competencies that aren't on your resume. The board flagged it to the regional licensing authority, and the licensing authority flagged it to a federal contractor who works with veteran reintegration. He paused. That contractor called me on a Tuesday morning and told me he'd found Nora Callahan working the night rotation at a hospital in Oregon. And you came in person, she said. I came in person. She looked at Tomas again, then back at Drummond. Why? Drummond was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence of thought, but the presence of something he was deciding how to say. Because what they're doing to you at that hospital is wrong, and because you have people who owe you something, and because you have been living like someone who is serving a sentence for a crime you didn't commit. He said it flatly, without decoration. Martinez being alive doesn't undo 3 years of that, but it changes what the sentence was for. The coffee cooled. The wind moved through the building's walls again. Tomas watched the street. Nora sat with it for a long time. Then she said, The nursing board. What exactly did they flag? Drummond pulled a folded document from his jacket. He slid it across the table. That's a summary. Non-classified. The short version is that your civilian nursing credentials are real. You earned them after separation. The coursework is legitimate. But you listed your prior medical experience as military field support and left the certifications blank, which is legal. But it means Harlow General has been employing someone with trauma-level medical training and treating them like a first-year floor nurse. She looked at the document. Sandra Voss filed the complaint. Yes. She was trying to end my career. She filed the complaint to trigger a licensing review that would pull my credentials and make the incident report look like a pattern of overreach. That's what it looks like, Drummond said. She didn't know it would do the opposite. No, he said. She didn't. Nora folded the document, set it on the table, picked up her mug again. The coffee was lukewarm, but she drank it anyway, because it gave her hand something to do while she thought. The thing she was thinking about was not what Drummond expected her to be thinking about, which was probably the nursing board or her record or the complaint. She was thinking about Joel Bryce, about the specific shade of gray his skin had been, about the tracheal deviation that had been subtle enough that two experienced physicians had not seen it until she named it. She was thinking about the fact that he had a blood pressure of 68 when she stepped in and 94 when the shift ended, and that nobody at Harlow General had officially acknowledged that the outcome existed but the acknowledgement didn't, that the man had lived but the person who had helped him live was sitting in administrative limbo being reviewed for misconduct. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Right now?" "Nothing. We're handling some things on our end." Drummond paused. "But I think things at Harlow General are going to move faster than the hospital expects. And when they do, I want you to be ready." "Ready for what?" He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. "To stop hiding." She didn't answer that. She got up and refilled the coffee she hadn't finished and stood at the counter with her back to both of them for a moment, looking at the window above the sink where the November dark had fully settled in. She could see her own reflection, blurred, partial, the way reflections in glass at night give you just enough to know you're there. Tomas spoke from the window. "There are 4 other people from the program. Medical designations, all of them, all in civilian roles, all with similar patterns, underutilized, misclassified, dealing with institutional friction because their skills don't fit the box they put themselves in." He paused. "You're not the only one." She turned around. "The advocacy organization," Drummond said, "is building a case. Not just about your situation, about a broader pattern of how the civilian medical system handles veterans with specialized training. Your incident at Harlow, the complaint, the review, the administrative leave, it's actually become a kind of test case." He said it carefully, watching her. "Whether you want it to be or not." She stared at him. "I didn't agree to be anyone's test case." "No," he said. "You didn't get a vote. That's kind of the problem with things that happen to you while you're trying to stay out of sight." It was such a precise summary of the last 3 years that she laughed. A short, involuntary sound that surprised her, that surprised Drummond, and made something in his face ease slightly, the way a person looks when they realize the person they've been worried about is still actually in there. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She sat back down. "Tell me what's happening on your end." They stayed until almost midnight. By the time they left, Nora had a clearer picture of the shape of things, which was both better and worse than the fog she'd been living in. Better because she had information. Worse because information, once you have it, starts requiring decisions. She slept badly. She dreamed about Martinez. Not the bad version of that dream, not the one she'd had for months after separation, where she replayed the last 12 minutes, but a simpler version, almost domestic, where he was just sitting at a table drinking something, and he looked up when she came in and said, "Hey," the way people do when seeing someone they know has been a while but isn't strange. She woke at 5:30 and lay in the dark and thought about what Drummond had said. To stop hiding. She had never called it that exactly. She had called it managing the situation and keeping a low profile and being realistic about context. Drummond, who had always had the particular gift of naming things accurately and without mercy, had called it hiding. He wasn't wrong. The question was what the alternative looked like. At 7 a.m., her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. "Ms. Callahan." A woman's voice. Precise, unhurried. "My name is Judith Farrow. I'm the executive director of the Meridian Veterans Medical Advocacy Coalition. I believe Captain Drummond mentioned we might speak." "He mentioned an organization," Nora said. "We've been following your situation at Harlow General. I want to be direct with you about why we're interested." Farrow paused, not for effect, but to indicate that what she was about to say required its own space. "We've been tracking a pattern across 17 hospitals in the Pacific Northwest. Veterans with medical training, combat medics, field surgeons, trauma specialists, who enter civilian nursing or PA roles and are systematically suppressed when their skills surface. Your case is one of 6 active situations we're monitoring, but yours has moved faster than the others because of the nursing board complaint." "Sandra Voss did me a favor," Nora said dryly. "She did," Farrow said, and she sounded like someone who had been around long enough to appreciate the particular irony of people who try to end things inadvertently accelerating them. "Ms. Callahan, we want to support you through the licensing review." We have legal staff who've dealt with this specific scenario. We also want, with your permission, to use the documented outcome data from your intervention, the patient's vital trajectory, the chart record, as part of a formal submission to the hospital credentialing committee. Harlow General's credentialing committee isn't going to want to hear from me. No, Farrow said. They're not. That's not the point. The point is creating a formal record that goes above the hospital's internal process. Nora was quiet. I know this isn't what you wanted, Farrow said. I know you came to Delwood specifically to not be visible. I'm not asking you to want this. I'm asking whether you're willing to let it happen. There was a long silence on the line. Not empty, but the kind of silence where both people on the call understand that what's being asked is real and has weight and can't be unsaid once it's agreed to. Send me the documentation you have, Nora said. I'll look at it. I'll send it today. She hung up and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands, which were steady, which was its own kind of answer about how she felt versus how she was choosing to function. Farrow's documentation arrived by email at 10 a.m. Nora read it at her kitchen table with the second cup of coffee and the November rain starting against the windows. It was 27 pages. She read all of it. It was thorough, careful, and deeply uncomfortable in the specific way that accurate documentation about your own life tends to be when someone else has assembled it. The 6 cases Farrow had referenced were outlined in broad strokes. No names, just designations. Subject A, female, 10 years combat medical experience, now licensed RN at a regional hospital, multiple incident reports for clinical overreach in the prior calendar year, outcome analysis of flagged incidents, 3 prevented adverse events, 2 early diagnoses confirmed by attending physician within 48 hours, 1 intervention resulting in documented patient survival. Nora read Subject A and understood she was not Subject A but could have been. She was Subject F. Subject F. Female, 14 months embedded specialized medical operations. Separation in good standing. Currently employed as RN, night rotation, regional hospital, Delwood, Oregon. Single documented incident. Tension pneumothorax identification in active trauma bay. Intervention initiated by subject verbally, confirmed and executed by attending physician Dr. P. Nambiar. Patient outcome, BP stabilized from 68/42 to 94/60 within 62 minutes of intervention. Hospital response, incident report filed by charge nurse, administrative leave initiated, licensing board complaint submitted. She read it twice. Then she went to the page with Dr. Nambiar's name highlighted and noticed something she hadn't expected. A footnote, which said that Dr. Priya Nambiar had submitted a counterstatement to the incident report within 24 hours of Sandra Voss's filing, documenting Nora's assessment as clinically accurate and noting that the attending physician's initial treatment plan had not addressed the pneumothorax component. Nambiar had put it in writing. Nora hadn't known that. Nobody had told her. She sat with that for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called Drummond. Nambiar filed a counterstatement, she said when he answered. I know, he said. I know about it. Why didn't you tell me last night? Because you had enough new information last night. I didn't want to stack it. She considered objecting to that and decided not to. It changes things. It changes some things. The hospital's going to try to minimize it. She's not the attending of record on the case, Holt is, and Holt hasn't said anything officially. Yet, Nora said. Yet, Drummond agreed, and his voice had the tone of someone who has reason to think yet is doing real work in that sentence. She didn't ask him what he meant by that. She had learned, in 14 months of working alongside him, that Drummond told you what you needed when you needed it, and that pushing for the rest usually just meant he told you less. I'm going to work with Farrow's organization, she said. Good. I don't want to be a public face for anything. Understood. Farrow knows that. I want this handled the right way, through the actual systems, with actual documentation. Not a media story, not a social campaign, evidence. That's exactly what she wants too, Drummond said. That's why she came to you instead of the others. He paused. You're the one who has the clearest chart outcome. The numbers are on your side. The numbers were always on my side, she said. Yeah, he said. That's kind of the whole problem with what they did. She hung up. She looked at the rain on the window, which had gotten heavier while she wasn't watching. She thought about Joel Bryce and wondered if he knew what had happened in that trauma bay. If he knew there had been a person standing at the back wall who had seen what the room missed. If he knew the argument that had started because of it. Probably not. Patients rarely knew the full story of their own emergencies. They woke up on the other side of something and the details were already behind them. She thought about Drummond saying, "Stop hiding." She thought about Martinez being alive and sitting somewhere recovering, and the 14 months she had carried the wrong version of that story inside her like a stone she'd agreed to carry because she thought she deserved the weight. She opened the documentation again. Read it a second time, slower. At 2 in the afternoon, she was on her third read of the credentialing section when her phone rang again. Not Drummond, not Farrow. A local number. She answered. "Miss Callahan." Male voice, careful, the voice of someone choosing each word. "This is Dr. Marcus Holt." She said nothing. "I know this is—" He stopped. Tried again. "I spoke with Dr. Nambiar this morning about the counterstatement she filed." Another pause. "I've been told you're on administrative leave." "That's correct." "I need to tell you something." His voice had an edge to it that she could not fully identify. Not guilt, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a man who has been holding on to something he knows he shouldn't be holding. "What you saw in that trauma bay. The deviation. I saw it too once you named it, and I should have said that in the official record. I didn't. I let the charge nurse's report stand without adding my clinical notes. That was wrong." Nora sat very still. "I'm amending my clinical notes," he said. "Today. I wanted you to know before you heard it through other channels." "Why now?" she said. The question sat in the air. It wasn't hostile. It was just the real question. "Because Nambiar made me look at my own chart," he said, "and because Joel Bryce came back this morning to pick up his discharge papers, and he asked who the nurse was who called the pneumo. He said he wanted to thank her." A pause. "The desk didn't have your name on file for that shift. He's still looking." She closed her eyes, opened them. "Thank you for calling," she said. I know it doesn't fix the report or the leave or whatever they've started with the licensing board. I know an amended note isn't. It's something," she said. "It counts." She hung up. She sat in her apartment with the rain against the windows and the 27 pages of documentation on her kitchen table, and the particular unfamiliar sensation of things moving in the right direction for the first time in a very long time, which was exactly when she got the email from Dennis Pruitt in HR. She almost didn't open it right away. She made herself finish the coffee first, which was cold. Then she opened it. "Dear Ms. Callahan, this letter is to inform you that following a review of the incident report filed on November 14th, hospital leadership has determined that the matter warrants escalation to a formal disciplinary panel. The panel will convene on November 28th. You are required to appear in person. Failure to appear will be treated as voluntary resignation. Please contact HR to confirm your attendance. Additionally, please be advised that the nursing board has indicated an expedited review of your licensure will be completed prior to the panel date, and the panel's findings will take the board's determination into account." She read it twice. November 28th. 11 days. The board review, expedited, would be done before then, which meant if Sandra Voss's complaint succeeded, if the board found her credentials insufficient or her conduct actionable, she would walk into that panel already stripped of her license. It was a trap structure, and it wasn't subtle. Someone had coordinated the timing. The board review and the hospital panel on the same track, the hospital panel holding the threat of resignation if she didn't show, and the board review designed to arrive just before it with the worst possible result. If both moved the way Sandra had intended, Nora Callahan would walk into that room on November 28th as a person whose license had been flagged and whose employer was looking for grounds to terminate. Neat, efficient, the kind of move that worked on people who were alone and didn't know anyone was watching. She forwarded the email to Drummond and Farrow simultaneously. Then she typed a message. "They've set a date, November 28th. Board review before panel. Someone coordinated this." Drummond responded in 4 minutes. "I see it. Farrow's legal team is already on the board review. Don't respond to HR yet." Farrow responded in 7. Don't confirm attendance yet. We're filing a formal response to the board complaint today. Do not engage HR or hospital administration directly. Let us do our job." Nora set her phone down. She looked at the rain. She looked at the documentation. She thought about the trap, the tidy, coordinated trap, and about the person who had set it, who had done it thinking she was dealing with a floor nurse who was alone and uninformed and already worn down by 3 years of being ignored. Sandra Voss had filed that nursing board complaint to end Nora Callahan's career. What Sandra Voss had actually done was open a file that should never have been opened, in front of people who should never have had reason to look. The expedited board review was going to arrive with Meridian's legal team attached. The clinical documentation, Nambiar's counterstatement, Holt's amended notes, Joel Bryce's chart numbers, was going to be in that record before the panel convened. And Drummond, who was not a man given to vague promises, had said things were moving on his end. Nora stood up from the table. She went to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, the east side of Delwood going gray and water-blurred, the street below empty except for a delivery truck parked at the corner with its hazards blinking orange in the dark afternoon. She thought about what Drummond had said, to stop hiding, and what she had almost said back to him, which was, "I'm not hiding, I'm just waiting for the right moment." Except that had not been entirely true, had it? She had been hiding. She had been hiding because she thought she was protecting something, or atoning for something, or both. She had been hiding because the weight of Martinez, alive but unknown to her, had felt like proof that she should not trust herself with anything that mattered. She had been hiding because Sandra Voss's voice, saying, "Stay in your lane," had rhymed too easily with older voices she had spent years carrying. But Martinez was home. Holt had amended his notes. Nambiar had filed a counterstatement without being asked. Farrow had 27 pages of documentation. Drummond had come in person. The lane she had been told to stay in had never been her lane. She had been standing in the wrong corridor in the wrong uniform, running at a fraction of what she was capable of, because she had decided, wrongly, it turned out, that making herself small was the same thing as making things safe. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't have saved. She looked at it. "This is Joel Bryce. The desk at Harlow gave me this number. I hope that's okay. I'm trying to find the nurse who said to roll me. The doctors told me what happened. I want to say thank you in person if you're willing." She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she looked up at the rain-gray window, at the blurred reflection of herself standing in her small apartment with the 27 pages on the table behind her, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not the way things shifted in movies, but in the quieter, more permanent way of something that has been braced against pressure for a very long time, finally being allowed to move. She typed back, "I'm willing." She set the phone down. Her email chimed. She looked at it. It was from Farrow's office. Not a long email. 1 paragraph, 2 sentences that mattered. "The nursing board has received our submission. You should also be aware we've been contacted by 2 additional physicians from Harlow General's ER department who wish to provide supporting statements. One of them is the attending of record from a separate incident, 14 months ago, where your clinical assessment prevented a medication error that was not documented at the time." 14 months ago, before Sandra Voss had ever heard her name. She read the email again. Then she pulled up the incident report Sandra had filed and looked at the date, November 14th. And then she thought about every shift before that, every quiet correction, every moment she had said something carefully and let it go when it was dismissed, every time she had been invisible on purpose and the invisibility had cost someone something. The thing about a paper trail, she was learning, was that it ran in both directions. Outside, the hazard lights on the delivery truck blinked steadily in the rain. Orange, then dark, then orange again. Patient and regular and impossible to ignore if you were standing in the right place to see them. She picked up her phone again, called Drummond. He answered on the second ring. 2 more physicians, she said. "Farrow just told me. A medication error 14 months ago." "I heard." "You heard already?" "Farrow called me 10 minutes ago." His voice was steady, not triumphant, not careful, just steady, the way he got when something was confirmed rather than hoped for. "Callahan, listen to me. I want you to go to the panel on the 28th. She waited. "I want you to go." he said, "and I want you to walk in there with everything on the table. Not to defend yourself. You're not going in to defend. You're going in because the evidence belongs in that room, and you're the one who has the right to bring it." "You said things were moving on your end," she said. "What things?" A pause. The kind of pause that meant he had been waiting for her to ask. "Your service record," he said. "The non-classified portion, the certifications, the operational medical designations, the training tier. We've been in contact with the hospital's board of directors, not administration, the board, and they've agreed to receive a formal briefing on your background prior to the panel date." She went still. "The board of directors," she said. "Yes." "Sandra Voss filed a complaint to end my career," she said slowly, "and it's going to result in the board of directors of Harlow General being briefed on my military medical record." "That's where we are," Drummond said. She looked at the window again. The rain, the orange lights, the dark afternoon. "She has no idea," Nora said. "No," Drummond said. "She doesn't." The silence between them was not empty. It was the silence of two people who have been through enough real things together to understand when something real is happening. "November 28th, she said. "November 28th, he said. She hung up. She stood in her apartment for a long moment. The rain and the orange lights and the 27 pages and the text from a man named Joel Bryce who wanted to say thank you. And she felt the full specific weight of what was coming. Not fear, not relief. Something more like readiness. The particular quality of a person who has been waiting for the right ground, who has been patient in the wrong place for a long time, and who can finally see the terrain clearly. 11 days. The panel was 11 days away, and somewhere in the hospital across town, Sandra Voss was going about her shift, reading her emails, managing her floor, convinced that the trap she had set was working exactly as intended, unaware that every mechanism she had put in motion had reversed on her, that the file she had opened was now in the hands of people who knew precisely what they were looking at, that the woman she had dismissed as a floor nurse with an overreach problem had a military record that would walk into that conference room and change every single thing about how that meeting went. Nora picked up her phone one more time and wrote a reply to Farrow. "I'll be there on the 28th. Send me the full file." She sent it. Then she went to her window, and for the first time in 3 years she looked out at Delwood. The wet streets, the low rooftops, the steady orange blink of those hazard lights in the rain, without the feeling that she needed to be smaller than the space she was standing in. But she had not yet opened the attachment Farrow had sent along with the reply that came back 90 seconds later. The one with the subject line that read, Harlow General, additional finding, urgent. She opened the attachment. It was 11 pages. The subject line said urgent, and Farrow had not used that word anywhere else in their correspondence, which meant she had chosen it deliberately, which meant Nora read it standing up, still in front of the window, the rain making its sound against the glass. The first 3 pages were case files, not hers. 2 nurses, 1 PA, all former military medical personnel, all employed at Harlow General within the last 6 years. Nora read their designations and recognized the pattern immediately. Each one had come in with suppressed credentials. Each one had been managed by the same charge nurse structure. Each one had left the hospital within 18 months under circumstances the documentation described as voluntary separation following performance concerns. She turned to page 4. The 4th page had a header. Internal communication records, Harlow General Medical Center, obtained via formal records request, November 17th. She read it. Then she read it again. The emails were between Sandra Voss and the hospital's former HR director, dating back 4 years. They were professional in tone, careful, the kind of careful that meant the person writing them knew they might be read later. But the content was not careful. The content was a coordinated, systematic approach to identifying veteran medical personnel, flagging their performance records with incident reports, and creating documentation trails that could be used to push them out before their actual qualifications surfaced in any meaningful way. One line in an email from Sandra Voss dated March of the prior year read, "If they're too good at the job they shouldn't have, they become a problem. Better to manage the problem early." Nora stared at that sentence, too good at the job they shouldn't have. She set her phone down on the table. She pulled out the chair and sat down. She looked at the rain-gray window and the orange light still blinking on the delivery truck below, and she thought about 3 years of wearing down her edges, of choosing the quieter call, of stepping back from moments that her training told her to step into. She thought about the other nurses in those files, people she had never met, whose names she didn't know, who had done the same math she had done and reached the same conclusion about the cost of being seen. She picked up her phone. She called Pharaoh directly. "You read it," Pharaoh said. "How did you get those emails?" "Records request, submitted the day after you forwarded the HR notice. Oregon public records law requires hospitals receiving state funding to produce internal communications relevant to employment discrimination complaints within 15 business days. We filed the complaint and the records request simultaneously." "You filed a discrimination complaint?" "On behalf of the 3 individuals named in the case files, with your situation as supporting evidence. The hospital's legal team responded in 48 hours, which tells you how seriously they're taking it, and as part of the response, they produced a partial communication record." Pharaoh's voice was steady, measured. "The emails were in the partial record. They didn't realize what they'd handed us." Nora processed that. "Sandra Voss has been doing this for 4 years. At minimum. The email record only goes back to what the partial production covered. We believe the pattern is older. The 3 people in the files, where are they now?" 2 left nursing entirely. 1 is at a clinic in Portland working below her qualification level. A pause. "We're in contact with all 3. They're willing to provide statements." Nora thought about too good at the job they shouldn't have and felt something cold and specific settle in her chest. Not anger, exactly. Anger was too reactive, too hot for what this was. This was something more like the feeling of a diagnosis confirmed, something you had suspected but not wanted to believe until the evidence made believing otherwise impossible. "The panel is in 11 days, Nora said. 10 now, Pharaoh said. "It's past midnight." Nora looked at the window. She had not noticed the time. "We're going to present the full communication record at the panel," Pharaoh said. "Combined with the 3 supporting physician statements, your clinical outcome documentation, and the military record briefing that Captain Drummond's contact is delivering to the board. We're not just defending your individual case anymore, Ms. Callahan. We're presenting a systemic pattern." The hospital's legal team will push back. Of course they will. That's what legal teams do. But they've already produced the emails. They can't unproduce them. A brief pause. "I want you to come into our office before the panel. I want you to sit with our legal staff and go through every documented interaction you've had with Sandra Voss, every incident report, every verbal warning, every shift assignment change, in chronological order. We need your memory of events alongside the documentary record." "When?" "Thursday, 10 a.m. "I'll be there," Nora said. She hung up and sat in her kitchen with the 11 pages and the rain and the delivery truck's blinking lights until the truck eventually pulled away and the street outside went uniformly dark. She did not sleep well. She hadn't expected to. Thursday came in gray and cold, the kind of Oregon November morning that did not bother pretending to be anything other than what it was. Nora drove across Delwood to Pharaoh's office, a building on the west side, professional without being corporate, the kind of space that had plants and natural light and a receptionist who offered water or coffee and meant it. She took the coffee. Pharaoh in person was in her mid-50s, trim, with close-cropped silver hair and the quality of attention that Nora associated with people who had spent years listening professionally, not passively, but actively, with the particular focus of someone who understood that the details others glossed over were usually the ones that mattered. The legal staff was 2 people, Renata Yu, who handled employment law and had the rapid, precise speaking style of someone who thought about 4 things simultaneously and was comfortable with that, and Warren Dills, who was older, quieter, and had the file memory of a person who had spent 30 years remembering exactly what had been said in exactly which room. They put Nora in a chair at a long table and spent 3 hours going through her 3 years at Harlow General in granular detail. Every interaction with Sandra Voss, documented or not. Every incident, every pull aside in the hallway, every shift change, every patient situation where she had made a call and been criticized for it afterward. You took notes with a speed that suggested she was transcribing rather than summarizing. Dills occasionally asked her to slow down and repeat something with more specificity. It was not comfortable. It was the opposite of comfortable. It was the particular discomfort of having to reconstruct, in precise language, things you had experienced and then spent time trying to put behind you. At one point, recounting a night 14 months ago when she had flagged a medication interaction to Sandra and been told to mind the chart instead of the clinician's judgment, Nora's voice went flat in a way she didn't intend, and she stopped talking mid-sentence. Nobody pushed her. Pharaoh set a glass of water on the table. Renata waited with her pen still. Nora took the water, looked at the table for a moment, and continued. By 1 o'clock, they had built a timeline that covered 11 documented incidents over 3 years, supported by chart records, shift logs, and the communication emails. You printed it and put it on the table, and the three of them looked at it. The pattern holds across all 11, you said. Callahan identifies a clinical concern. Callahan is warned to stay in her lane. The concern is validated within 48 hours by a physician. No acknowledgement in Callahan's record. In 3 cases, the lack of acknowledgement was replaced by a negative notation. She was replacing correct calls with misconduct flags, Dills said. It wasn't a question. In 3 instances, yes. In 8, she just made sure the correct call went unrecorded, and the warning did. Nora looked at the timeline. 11 incidents, 3 years. She had known something was wrong. She had not known the scope of it, laid out like this, in black and white, with dates and chart numbers attached. This isn't about me specifically, she said. No, Pharaoh said. It never was. You were a category. You happened to be the one who created a paper trail she couldn't fully control, because Joel Bryce's vital signs don't lie, and 2 physicians went on record. Nora thought about that, about the specific way that one moment in a trauma bay, one decision to say the true thing out loud instead of staying quiet, had pulled a thread that turned out to be attached to 4 years of systematic damage. She thought about how close she had come to staying quiet. How many times before that night she had stayed quiet and walked away and eaten the cost herself. The drive home was quiet. She took the long way through the neighborhood near the hospital, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to see it. The building, the parking lot, the broken staff entrance she had pushed with her shoulder for 3 years. She drove past slowly and looked at it from the car window, the gray exterior against the gray sky, and thought about everything that had happened inside that building without leaving a mark on the outside of it. She did not stop. She drove home. The next 6 days had the particular quality of time during which you are waiting for something large. She ran every morning. She answered Yu's questions by email, filling in gaps in the documentary record. She had coffee with Joel Bryce on a Saturday. He was recovering well, walking with a slight favor on the right side that he said the physical therapist had promised was temporary. He was a straightforward man, a construction foreman from the south side of Delwood, with large hands and a direct way of talking that she liked immediately. I didn't know what was happening, he said. I was going in and out. I remember someone saying something about rolling me, and then everybody moving, and then nothing for a while. It was loud in there, she said. The doctor, Nambiar, the woman doctor, she came to see me before I was discharged. She told me what you saw. He looked at her across the coffee shop table with the kind of directness that didn't ask permission. She said you were on administrative leave because of it. Ongoing situation, Nora said. That's insane. The system is complicated. The system has a person on leave for saving someone's life. That's not complicated, that's wrong. He said it without heat. Just the flat assessment of a man who worked in an industry where things either held weight or they didn't, and he'd learned early to tell the difference. What can I do? She looked at him. Are you willing to provide a statement about what happened to me? About your experience, your recollection, your outcome, your awareness of the circumstances? She paused. You don't have to. This isn't your fight. You saved my life, he said. Not dramatically, just as the fact it was. The physicians intervened, she said, after you told them where to look. He picked up his coffee. Tell me where to send the statement. She texted him Renata Yu's email address. He typed it into his phone with his large, careful thumbs, and she watched him do it and felt something in her chest that she could not have named precisely, but that had something to do with the specific texture of ordinary decency, the kind that didn't require anything extraordinary, just a person willing to say what was true. She sent you a heads up that evening. You responded in 12 minutes. Outstanding. His statement plus the vital trajectory creates a direct causal narrative that's almost impossible to argue with. Almost, Nora noted, not completely. Nothing was ever completely. On November 26, 2 days before the panel, Drummond called. The board briefing happened this morning, he said. She had been waiting for this call. She had been going about her morning pretending she wasn't waiting for this call. How did it go? The board's chair is a woman named Patricia Reeves, 61, former hospital administrator, been on the Harlow board for 9 years. She received the briefing, she read your service designations, and she asked one question. What question? She asked why a person with your training and certifications was classified as a floor nurse at her hospital for 3 years. Nora said nothing. Nobody in the room had an answer, Drummond said. The hospital's COO was present. He did not have an answer either, which meant Patricia Reeves got to answer it herself. A pause. She said, and I'm quoting here, because someone made sure she stayed invisible. And then she ended the briefing and called her legal counsel. She's moving separately from the panel. Yes, she's conducting her own inquiry into Sandra Voss's employment history and the HR practices behind the 3 previous departures. It runs parallel to the panel, not through it. He paused again. The panel is still happening. You still need to be in that room, but it's not the only room where things are moving now. Sandra Voss doesn't know any of this, Nora said. Sandra Voss thinks she's running the clock down. She thinks you're going to walk into that panel on the 28th either without a license or with a compromised one, and the panel is going to use that to justify termination, and the whole thing ends quietly. He was quiet for a moment. She's been managing situations like this for 4 years. She knows how the process works. She just doesn't know what process she's actually in. Nora thought about Sandra Voss walking her floors, managing her reports, preparing whatever she was going to present at the panel, going about her days in the full confidence of someone who had done this before and understood the machinery. The nursing board decision, Nora said. Do we know the timing? Farrow's legal team filed the response. The board has the physician statements, the clinical documentation, and a formal submission from the Meridian Coalition. The expedited review should complete by the 27th. He paused. It's not going to go the way Voss intended. You're confident about that. The board reviewer is looking at a nursing license complaint filed against someone whose operational medical training exceeds the credentials required for the position she holds. The complaint is that she overperformed. That's not a sustainable complaint. After she hung up, she made lunch and ate it standing at the counter because she couldn't sit still. And then she went for a run in the cold November afternoon and thought about Patricia Reeves saying, because someone made sure she stayed invisible in a room full of hospital executives, and about Sandra Voss reading incident reports on a floor she'd managed for 16 years without any idea that the ground under it had shifted. The evening of the 27th, the night before the panel, her phone showed a notification from Farrow at 9:47 p.m. Oregon State Nursing Board determination received. Complaint dismissed. License confirmed unrestricted. Full written determination to follow. See you tomorrow. She read it. She set the phone face down on her kitchen table. She stood at her window for a long time. The November dark, the street below, a quiet Tuesday night in Delwood. And she allowed herself, briefly, the specific and private experience of knowing that the thing she had been afraid of did not happen. Then she went to bed, because the panel was at 9 a.m., and she intended to be clear-headed for it. She was. She drove to the hospital in the morning gray, parked in the lot she had parked in for 3 years, pushed the staff entrance door with her shoulder, out of habit before catching herself and using the public entrance instead. Farrow was already in the lobby with Renata Yu and Warren Dills. Dills was carrying a leather document case that was clearly heavy. Board decision? Nora asked quietly. License confirmation, physician statements, clinical documentation, communication emails, timeline, the 3 former employees' written statements, Joel Bryce's statement, and the Meridian Coalition's formal submission, Yu said, plus the non-classified summary of your service record and certifications, authorized for release by Captain Drummond's office this morning. They went in. The panel room was a conference room on the 4th floor. The administrative level, all carpet and subdued lighting, and the particular silence of a floor where nobody was in immediate danger and people had time to arrange their expressions. A long table. 6 chairs on one side for the panel. 3 chairs on the other side for Nora and her representatives. The panel members filed in. 2 HR executives, the hospital's COO, a man named Gerald Watts, who had been in that room with Patricia Reeves 2 days ago and looked like a person carrying something heavy in a manner he hoped was not obvious. A patient care quality director, an external reviewer, and Sandra Voss. Sandra Voss sat at the far end of the panel table. She was composed, in the way she was always composed. A deliberate steadiness that Nora recognized as the professional face of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. She looked at Nora once, briefly, with an expression that landed somewhere between assessment and certainty. Then she looked at the panel's agenda document in front of her. She had not registered Farrow. She had not registered the leather document case. She was looking at Nora Callahan, floor nurse on administrative leave, and she was seeing exactly what she expected to see. Gerald Watts opened the panel. He read the formal language, the purpose of the proceeding, the parameters of the review. He confirmed that the nursing board determination had been received that morning. His voice was careful in a way that Nora noticed, the way you notice a specific word choice that tells you the person saying it knows more than they're saying. "Ms. Callahan," he said, "you're here regarding the incident report filed November 14th, citing unauthorized clinical intervention and breach of scope of practice. You have representation present?" "I do," Nora said. "Judith Farrow, Meridian Veterans Medical Advocacy Coalition and Council." Sandra Voss looked up from her document. It was the first moment, the first crack in the composure. Not dramatic, not obvious, but Nora saw it, because she had been trained to read the moment before a situation changed, and this was that moment. Sandra's eyes went to Farrow, to you, to the document case, and then, for the first time, back to Nora with something different in them. Not fear. Not yet. Something more like recalculation. Watts said, "The coalition has submitted a formal response to the proceedings, which has been provided to all panel members. I'll ask that I'd like to address the panel directly," Nora said. Watts paused. It's within procedure," Dills said quietly. "The respondent has the right to address the panel prior to document review." Watts looked at the external reviewer, who nodded. "Proceed," Watts said. Nora looked at the panel. She did not look at Sandra Voss. She looked at each of the 5 other faces in turn, taking a moment on each one. And then she spoke. "On November 14th, a patient came into this hospital's trauma bay with a blood pressure of 68/42, and a presentation that was being treated as isolated splenic trauma. The primary attending had ordered interventions consistent with that diagnosis. The patient was not responding." She kept her voice even, informational, the way she would give a briefing. "I identified a secondary injury, a developing tension pneumothorax on the right side, based on the patient's positioning, neck vein presentation, and tracheal deviation. I communicated this observation to the medical team. Dr. Priya Nambiar confirmed the finding. The attending physician performed the indicated intervention. The patient's blood pressure rose from 68 to 94 over the following 62 minutes. The patient was discharged 6 days later and is currently in outpatient recovery." She paused. "This is the incident that generated the report before you. An incident report was filed by the charge nurse on shift, citing my observation as unauthorized clinical intervention." She looked at Watts now. "I'm not here to argue scope of practice. I'm here because the documentation submitted by my representatives today demonstrates that this incident was not an isolated event and that the report filed against me was not an isolated action." She stopped there. Dills opened the document case. What happened over the next 40 minutes was not a confrontation. It was something more methodical than that. A presentation, careful and sequential, of evidence that had been assembled by people who understood how to build a record. You walked the panel through the timeline. Dills submitted the documents one by one, identifying each one, giving each panel member time to read the relevant sections. Farrow spoke to the pattern across the 3 former employees, their statements, the communication emails. Sandra Voss sat at the end of the table and did not speak. She was very still in the way of someone who has realized that the room they are in is not the room they thought it was. The COO, Gerald Watts, looked at the printed email, the one with "too good at the job they shouldn't have," for a long time. He set it down. He picked it up again. The quality director, a woman named Amara Singh, who had been taking notes steadily throughout, stopped taking notes at a certain point and looked up. "Ms. Voss," Singh said, "this email is from your account, March of last year." A long silence. "I'd like to respond with counsel present," Sandra said. "You are welcome to request that recess," Watts said. And his voice had changed. The carefulness from the beginning of the session had given way to something more stripped, more direct. He was not performing neutrality anymore. "However, the panel has received significant documentation this morning, and I think you should understand that the scope of today's proceeding has changed from what was originally contemplated." Sandra looked at him. "This panel was convened to review an incident report," Watts said. "On the basis of what has been submitted today, I am suspending that review and referring the matter to the board's Standing Audit Committee, which will conduct a comprehensive review of HR practices and incident report management over the prior 4-year period." He looked at Nora. "Ms. Callahan, your administrative leave is lifted effective immediately. Your position is restored pending the outcome of the Audit Committee's review, which will address the question of formal recognition and record correction." Nora said, "Thank you." She said it quietly, without emphasis. Not as a victory statement, as the plain acknowledgement it was. Sandra Voss's chair moved. She stood, because sitting had become intolerable. And in the act of standing, she looked at Nora across the conference table with an expression that had been stripped of its composure entirely. The professional surface gone, what was underneath it something that Nora did not enjoy seeing, but could not look away from. The particular look of a person watching the structure they built over 4 years come down in 40 minutes. "You planned this," Sandra said. Nora looked at her. "I saved a man's life," she said. "You made it into a plan." The room was silent. Then Amara Singh set her pen down and looked at the table, which was its own kind of answer. The recess Watts called lasted 20 minutes. In the hallway, Farrow stood with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had done this work long enough not to treat it as a performance. "Audit Committee," Yu said quietly. "That's better than the panel." "It's broader," Farrow said, "and it's board level. It goes above Watts, above HR. It goes to Reeves." "What happens to Sandra Voss now?" Nora asked. "The Audit Committee will review her employment record, the incident report she filed, the departure circumstances of the 3 prior employees. It will take weeks, possibly months, but the emails are in the official record now." Farrow looked at her. "She cannot unsend them." Nora nodded. "Your record will be corrected through the audit process," Farrow said. "It won't be fast." "I know. And the 3 people who left, the 2 who left nursing, the 1 in Portland, that's a separate process, potentially a legal process." "Whatever they need," Nora said. Dills was repacking the document case with the careful efficiency of a man who had done this many times. He paused and looked at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've worked employment cases for 30 years. I don't often see documentation this clean." "The chart numbers were always there," she said. "Nobody had looked at them together before." He nodded once and snapped the case closed. She walked back toward the elevator. Farrow fell into step beside her, Yu on the other side. They were almost at the elevator when Nora heard footsteps behind her. Quick, the sound of someone catching up. She turned. It was Dr. Marcus Holt. He was in his white coat, clearly between patients, slightly out of breath. He stopped when she turned. "I heard the panel ended early," he said. "Someone on the administrative floor told me." He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been carrying something uncomfortable for 11 days and had decided to set it down. "I want to ask you something." She waited. "When you saw it," he said, "in the trauma bay, the tracheal deviation, when did you know?" She thought about it honestly. About 30 seconds after they rolled him in. He absorbed that. 30 seconds. The positioning was wrong for the primary injury. Everything else followed. He looked at her for a long moment, not with the particular look of someone reassessing his own competence, though some of that was there, underneath, where it probably would live for a while, with something more complicated. The look of someone who has been good at his job for a long time, and has just encountered evidence that good is not the same as best. Nambiar said I should have listened to you earlier, he said. She said that in the counter statement. I know. She was right, he paused. I've been in that ER for 11 years. I don't often feel like I missed something obvious. He stopped. It wasn't obvious, she said. It was pattern recognition based on a specific training context. You didn't have that context. You did. Yes. He nodded, looked at the floor, looked back at her. I hope you stay in that ER, he said. Not as a favor to you, because we need you in that room. She didn't say anything immediately. Then, I'll think about it. He nodded again and walked back the way he'd come, hands in the pockets of his white coat, and she watched him go. Pharaoh said from beside her, That was generous. He amended his notes without being asked, Nora said. That took something. Still. People aren't only one thing, she said. He was wrong on the 14th and he fixed it when he understood what he'd done. That's not nothing. The elevator opened. They got in. Drummond was waiting in the lobby, not in uniform, in the same civilian clothes he'd worn to her apartment, standing near the entrance with his hands in his pockets and the quality of stillness that meant he had been there for a while and was prepared to wait longer. He looked at her face when the elevator doors opened and read it the way he read everything. Audit committee, she said. I heard. Reeves called me 20 minutes ago. She called you directly? She wanted to know if your service record could be formally included in the audit documentation, with appropriate redaction. He paused. I said yes. Nora looked at him. That's going to be a difficult document for this hospital to read. Yes, he said. It is. And his voice had the tone of someone who considered that appropriate. They walked out through the public entrance into the November air, cold, clean, the kind of morning that had given up pretending to be anything warmer. The parking lot was ordinary. The hospital behind them was ordinary. The gray exterior against the gray sky, the same building she had been pushing through a broken side door for 3 years. She stood in the parking lot and looked at it. What now? Drummond asked. Pharaoh needs me for the audit documentation process, she said. The 3 other people, the ones who left. I want to be involved in whatever support they need. And after that? She thought about Holt in the hallway. I hope you stay in that ER. She thought about the November morning, the cold air, the ordinary building. I'm going to go home, she said, and then I'm going to wait for Harlow General to formally request that I come back. Drummond looked at her sideways. You think they will? Reeves runs a board that just discovered it's been employing a veteran combat medic as a floor nurse for 3 years while someone systematically suppressed her record. She looked at the building. She'll request it. And if she does? Nora turned away from the hospital and walked toward her car. I'll have conditions, she said. She did not say what they were. She got in her car, put it in gear, and drove out of the parking lot, and she did not look in the rearview mirror because she was done looking at the building from the outside. What she did not yet know, what she would not know until she got home and found the voicemail already waiting, was that Patricia Reeves had called her direct number at 9:52 a.m. while the panel was still in recess, before the hallway conversation with Holt, before the elevator, before the parking lot. The voicemail was 53 seconds long. Nora would listen to it standing in her kitchen with her coat still on, and the last 12 seconds of it would not be what she expected at all. She listened to the voicemail standing in her kitchen with her coat still on, the cold of the November morning still on her skin, her keys in her hand because she hadn't put them down yet. Patricia Reeves had a voice that matched the impression Drummond had given her. Measured, deliberate, someone who had learned that the weight of what you said mattered more than how quickly you said it. The first 41 seconds of the message were what she had expected. An acknowledgement of the panel's outcome, a formal statement that the audit committee process was being initiated, a request that Nora contact the board's office directly rather than going through hospital HR for any subsequent communication. Then the last 12 seconds. Ms. Callahan, I also want you to know that I read the summary of your service record this morning. All of it. I want to speak with you personally, not as a procedural step, but as a conversation. I think we have something to discuss that goes beyond the audit. That was it. The message ended. Nora set her keys on the counter, She took off her coat. She stood in the kitchen and played the last 12 seconds twice more. Not because she hadn't heard it, but because she wanted to make sure she understood what she was hearing, which was not a formality, not a legal maneuver, but a person saying, "I see you," in the plainest possible terms. She called the number Reeves had left. It rang twice. "Ms. Callahan." Reeves picked up with the ease of someone who had been waiting for the call. "Thank you for responding quickly." "Of course. I'll be direct. I've been on this board for 9 years, and I've sat through enough personnel reviews to know when a situation is procedural and when it's something else. This morning was something else." A pause. "The email record your representative submitted, the communication between Ms. Voss and our former HR director, I read those emails 3 times, and I kept coming back to one question." Nora waited. "How many people knew?" Reeves said. "Not Voss, not the HR director. The physicians, the administrators, the staff who worked alongside these nurses for months or years. How many people saw the pattern and said nothing, and why?" It was a real question, not rhetorical. "Some people saw pieces of it," Nora said. "Nobody had the full picture because Voss managed the paper trail carefully. The incident reports were filed individually. The departures looked voluntary. Without someone aggregating the cases, there was nothing to see." Barrow's organization aggregated them. Yes. And only because the nursing board complaint created a searchable event that connected my name to the institution. Without that complaint, I would have gone through the panel quietly and we wouldn't be having this conversation. "So Voss's attempt to end your career created the conditions for us to find out what she'd been doing for 4 years." "Yes," Nora said. A brief silence. Then Reeves said, "I've scheduled a personal meeting, not in the hospital. I'd like to meet you at the board's offices, Thursday at 2, if you're available." "I'm available." "Good. And Ms. Callahan, I want you to come without your legal representatives for this particular meeting. This is not a procedural conversation. This is a conversation between 2 people, and I'd like it to stay that way for now." Nora considered that. In different circumstances with a different person on the line, she would have declined. But Drummond had said Reeves called me and given it the particular emphasis of someone describing a person who could be trusted with a specific thing. "Thursday at 2, she said. She hung up and finally put her keys down and made coffee she didn't especially need, but wanted something to do with her hands while she thought. The audit committee had been announced in that conference room at approximately 10:45 in the morning. By noon, 3 things had happened that Nora would learn about in the following hours in separate pieces. The first was that Sandra Voss had requested an emergency meeting with the hospital's legal counsel and been told that counsel would not be representing her individually in the audit process, which was the moment, according to Renata Yu, who had a contact in the hospital's administrative wing, that Sandra understood the full geometry of her situation. The second was that Gerald Watts, the COO, had issued a memo to all department heads informing them that the audit committee process was underway and that any staff member with relevant information was encouraged to come forward through the board's office directly. The memo used the phrase relevant information twice and the phrase directly to the board 3 times, which was its own kind of signal. The third thing was that Dr. Priya Nambiar had sent Nora a text message at 12:17 that said simply, "Heard the panel ended. Good. Long overdue." 4 words of actual content and 1 assessment that carried 3 years of subtext. Nora replied, "Thank you for the counterstatement. I didn't know you'd filed it." Nambiar's response came back in 2 minutes. "Of course I filed it. What he did was wrong. What she filed was worse. I should have done more earlier." A pause, then a second message. "Buy you coffee sometime?" Nora typed back, "Yes." She spent the afternoon responding to Yu's documentation requests, which had expanded in scope following the panel. Yu was now building a comprehensive record that would support not just the audit, but the potential legal process on behalf of the 3 former employees. Nora went through her memory methodically, the same way she would have gone through a patient chart, looking for what was there, not what she wished was there, being precise about what she knew directly versus what she had inferred. It took 4 hours. At the end of it, she had produced 12 pages of typed notes that Yu said were the clearest personal testimony she had received in a case of this type. You write like someone who's given a lot of reports, you texted. Nora did not explain why. Wednesday passed in the particular way of days that are waiting for something. Drummond called in the morning to update her on the service record submission. The non-classified portion had been formally entered into the audit committee's document file, which meant it was now part of the official hospital record in a way that could not be quietly removed. Tomas sent a one-sentence text. Martinez wants to know your address to send something. She sent it. Thursday came. The board's offices were on the west side of downtown Delwood, not in the hospital, not near it, a separate suite in a building that had the quality of places where institutional decisions were made without the noise of the institution around them. Quiet carpet, real plants, a receptionist who offered water with the same sincerity as Pharaoh's office. Nora took water this time. Patricia Reeves was smaller than Nora had expected, which was an irrelevant observation, but an honest one. 61, silver-haired, in a dark blazer and reading glasses that she took off when Nora came in, and did not put back on. She gestured to two chairs arranged near a window rather than across a desk, which told Nora something about how she ran conversations. "I've been doing this work for 31 years, Reeves said when they had settled. Hospital administration, board, governance, institutional oversight. I've seen a great deal of what humans do to other humans inside medical institutions, which is a specific category of behavior that has its own particular texture." She looked at Nora directly. "What I read in your service summary is not something I've encountered in this context before." "Most people with that background don't end up in civilian nursing," Nora said. "Why did you?" It was the real question, the one underneath the audit, the panel, the legal process. Nora had known it was coming since Drummond said she wants to speak with you personally. "I needed to keep doing something useful," she said. "Medical work was what I knew. Nursing was accessible and the credential was achievable, and it meant I could work anywhere without the background being the first thing in the room." She paused. "I wanted to work, not to be the story of the work I'd done." "And instead you became invisible," Reeves said. Not accusatory, just naming the outcome. "I chose it, initially," Nora said, "and then it was chosen for me." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "I've been trying to understand Sandra Voss," she said. "Not excuse, understand. A 16-year employee, strong performance record before this, no prior disciplinary action. And then this." She gestured, a small movement that meant the emails, the pattern, all of it. "I think," Nora said carefully, that she understood at some level that people with certain training backgrounds and certain roles were a structural challenge to the hierarchy she'd built. Not a personal threat, a structural one. The incident reports were about control of the environment, not any specific individual. "Which makes it worse, in some ways," Reeves said. "Yes. Because it means it wasn't personal, but the damage was entirely personal." Reeves looked at the window. 3 people left nursing. 2 of them left the profession entirely. She said it quietly, with the weight of someone who understood what that meant. Not just the career cost, but the specific loss of people who had been trained to save lives being removed from positions where they could do it. Nora said nothing. She let the weight of it sit. "I want to ask you something directly," Reeves said. "And I want a direct answer." "All right. If we correct your record, address the audit findings, make the institutional changes that need to be made, are you willing to come back to Harlow General, not as a floor nurse, in a clinical role commensurate with your actual qualifications and training?" Nora looked at her. "I told Captain Drummond I would have conditions." "I assumed you would. That's why I asked for this meeting before the formal offer comes through channels." Reeves looked at her steadily. "Tell me the conditions." "The 3 former employees, the 2 who left nursing, the one in Portland. Whatever the legal process determines they're owed, the hospital supports it without contesting. And beyond that, there's a reinstatement pathway for any of them who want to return to the profession. Harlow General facilitates that formally, with documentation that corrects the record on their departures." Reeves nodded slowly. "That's one. The clinical role. I want authority to function at my actual training level, not a new title that still has me deferred to physicians who have less field experience than I do. A genuine collaborative structure. That's 2. The audit findings go to the state health authority, not as an internal document, as an official submission. The pattern Farrow documented doesn't only exist at Harlow General, and if it stays inside this institution's files, it doesn't help anyone outside them. Reeves was quiet. That was the hardest one. The one that went beyond the hospital's own interest, that meant acknowledging the problem to a regulatory body and accepting whatever came from that. That will have consequences for the institution, Reeves said. I know. You're asking me to recommend something that will result in regulatory scrutiny of a hospital I sit on the board of. I'm asking you to recommend something that might prevent the same pattern from operating for 4 years at the next institution before someone notices, Nora said. You asked me what I wanted. That's what I want. Another silence, longer than the others. 3 conditions, Reeves said. I need to take them to the full board. I can't give you an answer in this room today. I know, Nora said. I'm not asking for an answer today. Reeves looked at her with the expression of someone who has spent 31 years evaluating people across tables and has arrived at a conclusion. You knew, coming in here, that the 3rd condition would be the difficult one. Yes. And you included it anyway. It's the one that matters most, Nora said. The other 2 matter to specific people. That one matters to people I'll never meet. Reeves picked up her glasses from the table beside her. Not to put them on, just to hold them. Something to do with her hands while she thought, which Nora recognized as the same reflex she had with a coffee mug. I'll take it to the board, she said. I'll give you my recommendation before the formal offer comes through channels. That's what I can promise today. That's enough, Nora said. She drove home through the west side of Dellwood, through neighborhoods she didn't know well, taking the long way without planning to. The November afternoon was doing something it hadn't done yet this month. There was actual light in it, low and pale, the kind that arrived in the last hour before dark in late autumn and made everything look like a held breath. She drove through it and thought about the 3 conditions and about Reeves holding her glasses and about the 2 nurses who had left the profession and whether they were watching their inboxes or whether they had closed that door entirely. She hoped they hadn't closed it entirely. Back in her apartment, she found a padded envelope on her doorstep. No return address, but the postmark was from a city in southern Oregon she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was a photograph. Not framed, just a 4x6 print, the kind you ordered from a pharmacy. It showed a group of people in a nondescript outdoor setting, somewhere dry and flat. 7 of them, posing with the particular awkward semi-formality of people who were not used to posing. She recognized Drummond on the far right, younger, without the erosion that 3 years had put on him. She recognized Tomas beside him. She recognized herself, barely, the way you recognize yourself in old photos where you look different because you were a different version. And she recognized the man in the center of the photograph, laughing at something that had just happened off camera, who should by every piece of intelligence she'd had access to for 38 months have been dead. Martinez, looking exactly like himself. There was a note in the envelope, handwritten, brief. Heard you finally came in from the cold. About time. DM. She sat down on her doorstep and held the photograph, and the November light came down around her at its low, pale angle, and she sat with it for a long time before she went inside. The following days moved with the particular momentum of a situation that had tipped past its pivot point and was now traveling under its own weight. Used documentation expanded. The audit committee held its first formal session. Nora was not present, but Farrow was, and called her afterward with a summary that was thorough and not entirely linear because Farrow was energized in a way that made her less precise than usual, which was itself informative. They called Voss in for a formal interview, Farrow said, with the committee's legal counsel present. She attended with her own attorney. How did it go? Her attorney did most of the talking, which is what attorneys do when their client's position is difficult. But the emails are in the record, Nora. Her own words. There is a limit to what an attorney can do with too good at the job they shouldn't have sitting in an official document. What's the timeline for the committee's findings? 30 to 45 days for a preliminary report. The formal findings take longer. But the preliminary report is what matters for the HR outcomes, for Voss's employment status, the former employee's records, all of that. She's still working the floor? A brief pause. She was placed on administrative reassignment the day after the panel. She's in an office role pending the committee's preliminary findings. No patient contact, no staff supervision. Nora thought about that. Sandra Voss in an office, stripped of the floor, the charge position, the authority structure she had spent 16 years building. She thought about what that felt like, and then she stopped thinking about it, because what it felt like for Sandra Voss was not her responsibility to carry. The 3 former employees, Nora said. Have they been contacted? All 3. 2 have legal representation now, separate from us. We made referrals. The 3rd, the one in Portland, she called me directly. Farrow's voice shifted slightly. She cried on the phone. She said she'd been telling herself for 2 years that she had done something wrong, that there was a reason she'd been pushed out. She said she'd stopped trusting herself clinically because the documentation made it look like she'd been incompetent. Nora was quiet. She's not incompetent, Farrow said. Her file is exceptional. The notations Voss put in it were false. I know, Nora said. I thought you should know what it means to the people downstream of this. What you created by not staying quiet. She held the phone for a moment after the call ended, thinking about the nurse in Portland who had spent 2 years not trusting herself. Thinking about what that cost. Not abstractly, but specifically, in the daily texture of clinical work, of second-guessing the thing you were trained to know, of the particular damage that false documentation does when it becomes the mirror you look into. She thought about her own 3 years and was honest enough to admit they had not been entirely different. On the 9th day after the panel, Reeves called. The board met last night, she said. All 3 conditions were discussed. I want to give you the result before the formal communication goes through channels. All right, Nora said. The first 2 conditions, the former employee's pathway and the clinical role structure, the board approved both without significant debate. A pause. The 3rd condition, the submission to the state health authority. Nora waited. The board voted 4-3 in favor, Reeves said. I voted yes. Gerald Watts voted no. I want you to know the breakdown because you should understand that it wasn't unanimous and it wasn't easy, and the people who voted no weren't wrong to have concerns about the institutional consequences. They were wrong about the decision, in my view, but they weren't wrong to have concerns. I understand, Nora said. 4-3 is enough. It is, Reeves said. The submission will go to the State Health Authority within 30 days of the Audit Committee's preliminary findings. The formal offer of the clinical role will come through official channels within the week. You are under no obligation to accept it. I know. But I hope you will, Reeves said. And then in a tone that was different from the board chair voice, that was something more personal. What you described in that meeting, wanting to work without being the story of the work. I understood that. I still think the work needs you in it. I think Harlow General specifically needs you in it, in ways that will take time to fully understand. I'll read the formal offer, Nora said. That's all I'm asking. After that call, she called Drummond. 4-3, she said when he answered. On the state submission? Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then, that's the right call. I know, it costs them something to make it. The right calls usually do, he said. That's why they matter. She told him about Reeves, the chairs by the window, the glasses held in both hands, the 31 years. Drummond listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, taking inventory. When she finished, he said, She's the right person for this moment. She voted yes, Nora said. She voted yes, he agreed. And his voice had the quality of someone crediting something that deserved credit. The formal offer arrived 6 days later, through the board's office rather than HR, which was itself a statement. Nora read it carefully, twice, then a 3rd time with Renata Yu on the phone, going through the clinical role structure clause by clause. The title was Advanced Practice Clinical Specialist, which was an imperfect fit for what she actually was, but was the closest thing in the existing HR framework. The scope of practice language was broader than anything she'd had access to in 3 years of floor nursing. The reporting structure went directly to the chief medical officer rather than through charge nursing. The scope language is solid, Yu said. It's not everything, but it creates the structure you can build from. The 3 former employees, Nora said. Their pathway, it's in the formal agreement? Article 7, subsection C. The hospital commits to issuing corrected employment documentation within 60 days of the audit committee's preliminary report and to a formal reentry facilitation process for any qualified former employee who requests it. In writing, binding with the board's signature. You paused. Nora. This is a good agreement. She looked at the document on her kitchen table. Outside, the first week of December had brought something new to Delwood. Not snow, but the kind of cold that suggested it was thinking about it, the air clean and dry and carrying the particular quality of potential. She thought about the nurse in Portland who had stopped trusting herself. She thought about Martinez in his photograph, laughing at something off camera. She thought about Sandra Voss in an office with no staff to supervise, waiting for a preliminary report that was not going to tell her what she wanted to hear. She thought about the audit committee sitting with 4 years of documented evidence, the emails, the incident reports, the departure records, all of it assembled and cross-referenced and formally entered into an official record that would now travel to the state health authority and sit in a file that people she would never meet might one day use to recognize a pattern before it ran for 4 years. She picked up a pen. She was about to sign when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Not local. Area code she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had learned to almost let things go to voicemail, but something made her pick up. Ms. Callahan. A man's voice, not threatening, not aggressive, but with the particular quality of someone who had measured what they were about to say and had decided to say it anyway. My name is Raymond Voss. I'm Sandra Voss's husband. She set the pen down. I know you have no reason to take this call, he said. I'm asking for 2 minutes. You have them, she said. Sandra doesn't know I'm calling. She would not want me to make this call. He stopped, gathered something. I've been married to her for 22 years. I know who she is. I also know what she did. And I need you to understand. He stopped again, longer this time. I'm not calling to ask you to go easy on the process. I know it's not in your hands. I'm calling because I have a daughter. She's 23. She just finished her nursing degree. Nora was very still. She's been watching this, he said. What's happening to her mother? What came out? The emails. His voice had something fractured in it, the sound of a man holding a structure together that had sustained damage he hadn't expected. She called me last week and asked me if what her mother did was as bad as it sounded, and I had to tell her yes. And then she asked me if nurses who came from backgrounds like the people in the news articles if they were a threat to regular nurses. And I had to tell her no, that's not how it works. That's not what this was. A pause. She decided to take a position in pediatrics instead of emergency nursing because she said she didn't want to be in a room where someone like her mother might have trained her to look at her colleagues wrong. Nora said nothing. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I don't know why I called exactly. I think I wanted to tell someone who was in the middle of this that the damage goes in directions nobody planned. He cleared his throat. My daughter is a good nurse. She shouldn't start her career afraid of who she might become. No, Nora said quietly. She shouldn't. I'm sorry for what happened to you, and to the others. He said it plainly, without performance. I know it doesn't do anything. I just needed to say it to the right person. He hung up before she could respond. She sat at her kitchen table with the pen in her hand and the unsigned agreement in front of her, and the phone on the table between them and the December cold pressing at the windows. And she thought about a 23-year-old nurse choosing a department because she was afraid of what she might learn in a different one. She thought about it for a long time. Then she picked up the pen and signed the agreement on the line marked, Signature of Accepting Party. She slid it into the envelope you had sent. She sealed it. She set it by the door to mail in the morning. And then she pulled out her phone and found the number for the nurse in Portland. The one who had cried on the phone to Pharaoh, the one who had spent 2 years not trusting herself. And she composed a text message, slow and deliberate. This is Nora Callahan. Judith Pharaoh gave me your number. I know we haven't met. I wanted to tell you that I read your file. You weren't wrong. You were never wrong. The documentation that said otherwise is being corrected. I don't know if you want to come back to this work. But if you do, I want you to know there are people in your corner, including me. She read it over. She sent it. She went to her window. The December night was clear for the first time in weeks. No rain, no gray, just the specific dark of a cold sky with the ambient light of a city underneath it. The east side of Dellwood spread out below in its ordinary way, its streetlights and parked cars and lit windows. Her phone buzzed on the table. She turned. A response from the Portland number. 3 words. "I remember you." She stared at it. She had never met this woman. She had never worked a shift with her, never crossed a hallway with her, never been in the same room. She typed back, "We haven't met." The response came in 40 seconds. "Harlow General, 4 years ago. I was a new hire. You were already on nights. I watched you catch a medication interaction in the hallway outside room 9 and bring it to the attending without making a sound about it. The attending acted like it was his own idea. You walked away without saying anything." A pause, then another message. "I always wondered why you didn't say something. I think I understand now." Nora stood at her window and read that twice. 4 years ago. Before Sandra Voss had ever put her name in an incident report, before the nursing board complaint, before the panel, before Drummond appeared on her sidewalk. A hallway, a medication catch, a moment she didn't even remember clearly, and a person watching who had been shaped by it in a way Nora had never known. She looked at the signed agreement by the door. She looked at the photograph of Martinez on her kitchen counter, laughing at something off camera. And then her phone rang again. Not the Portland number, not Drummond, not Farrow. The hospital's main line, at 9:47 in the evening. She answered, "Miss Callahan." The voice was clipped, administrative, someone she didn't recognize. "I'm calling from Harlow General's overnight administration line. We have a situation in the ER and Dr. Nambiar asked me to call you directly." She straightened. "What situation?" "Multiple trauma, construction site collapse, 4 incoming, 2 critical. We're short 2 physicians. They're both in existing surgeries. Dr. Nambiar is the only attending on the floor and she's asking if you're—" A brief pause, the slight hesitation of someone who understood they were making an unusual request. "She's asking if you're available to come in." Nora looked at the signed agreement by the door. She looked at her coat on the hook. "Tell Dr. Nambiar I'm on my way," she said. She grabbed her coat off the hook and was in the car in 4 minutes. The drive to Harlow General at 9:50 on a December night took 11 minutes with no traffic, and she used them to run through what she knew: construction site collapse, 4 incoming, 2 critical, 1 attending. She didn't know the injury types, didn't know the mechanism of collapse, didn't know what Nambiar had already done with the non-critical patients, or how the ER was currently staffed. She knew Nambiar had asked for her specifically, which meant Nambiar had made a judgment call about who she needed in that room, and that judgment was not casual. She parked in the public lot because the staff lot required a badge that was still technically on administrative hold, and she didn't stop to think about the irony of that. She went through the public entrance, showed her ID to the front desk, and said she was expected by Dr. Nambiar in the ER. They waved her through without a call. The ER doors opened on controlled noise. The particular sound frequency of a department that was working hard, voices sharp and purposeful, equipment moving, monitors in multiple bays running simultaneously. She clocked it the way she always clocked a room: 4 bays active, 2 with curtains drawn, 1 with a crash cart nearby that hadn't been used yet. 3 nurses she recognized and 2 she didn't. A respiratory therapist moving fast toward the far end. Nambiar appeared from Bay 2 like she'd been watching the entrance. She was small and quick, and in that particular state of focused composure that experienced physicians developed for high-load situations. Not calm exactly, but controlled, the way a high-pressure system is controlled, all the energy directed rather than dispersed. "Thank you for coming," she said, and she meant it, not as a formality. "What do we have?" "Scaffolding collapse, commercial site on the north end. 4 from the scene. 2 are stable, already triaged. Lacerations, 1 possible wrist fracture, neither critical. The other 2 came in together." She was already moving and Nora fell into step. Bay 3, male, 44, blunt chest trauma, 2 confirmed rib fractures on imaging, oxygen saturation dropping. I've got him on supplemental O2, but he's fighting it. Bay 5, female, 31, the one I'm most worried about. Head trauma, GCS 9 at scene, 8 on arrival. She's intubated, BP unstable. Imaging on the female. CT's running now. I should have the read in 6 minutes. What's her BP doing? 72 over 48 on last check, 3 minutes ago. We've pushed fluids. She's not responding the way I want. Nambiar stopped outside Bay 5 and looked at Nora directly. I need eyes I trust on the chest case in Bay 3 so I can stay with her. He's conscious, he's scared, and his sats are going the wrong direction. Go, Nora said. She went into Bay 3. The man in Bay 3 was Gary Tolliver, according to the wristband, and he was 44 years old and he was terrified in the specific way of physically strong people who are not accustomed to their body failing them. Fighting the oxygen mask, trying to sit up, his eyes wide and tracking poorly. A nurse named Becca was at his left side talking to him in a steady, low voice that he wasn't hearing. Nora came in on his right. Mr. Tolliver? She put her hand on his forearm. Not a grip, just contact, the specific weight of a hand. I need you to look at me. He looked at her. I'm Nora. I'm going to help you. I need you to stop fighting the mask. I can't breathe with it on. I know it feels that way. Your chest hurts and the mask feels like pressure, and that's making your brain tell you to pull it off. But your oxygen level is low, and the mask is what's going to fix that. If you pull it off, it gets worse faster. She kept her voice level, informational, not soothing in a way that would feel false to him. You're a construction worker. You've worked in environments where you had to trust your equipment even when it felt wrong. This is the same. He looked at her. His hand, which had been moving toward the mask, stopped. There you go, she said. She checked his vitals, looked at the imaging that was already up on the bay's screen. 2 rib fractures confirmed, left side, 4th and 5th ribs, no flail chest, no obvious pneumo on the current imaging, but the sats were at 89 and the respiratory pattern was wrong. She watched him breathe, counted the rate, watched the accessory muscle use, the way his neck muscles were working harder than they should, the way each breath was slightly shallower than the last. Becca, she said, get me a sat probe on his right hand and call respiratory to bring a high-flow setup to Bay 3. Becca moved. She looked at the rib imaging again. The fractures were 4th and 5th, posterior left, not the typical anterior fractures from a fall, which suggested the impact had been lateral, which meant the force vector had been different than a straight-down collapse, which meant she wanted to know exactly how he had been positioned when the scaffolding came down. Tell me what happened, she said to him. What were you doing when it fell? He was breathing through the mask now, steadier. I was on the 3rd level. Something hit the support column. I went sideways into the railing. Lateral impact, left side against a railing. Did you hit anything after the railing? Did you fall? Went down about 4 feet, landed on my left side. She looked at the imaging one more time. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at Becca coming back in with the respiratory therapist. I want a repeat chest x-ray, she said. And I want it now, not in 20 minutes. The respiratory therapist looked at her badge, or rather the absence of the right badge, and started to say something. Dr. Nambiar authorized my presence in this ER tonight, Nora said. If you want to confirm that, call Bay 5, but do it after we get the x-ray. He got the x-ray. Came back in 8 minutes. She put it up next to the CT imaging and looked at both of them and found what she had been looking for. Subtle. Easy to miss if you were looking at the confirmed fracture sites and not the space between them. A small developing effusion at the left pleural base. Not a tension pneumo this time, not the same animal as Joel Bryce 3 weeks ago. A hemothorax. Blood accumulating in the pleural space from the rib fractures. Slow, and not yet critical, but moving in one direction. She stepped out of Bay 3 and walked the 12 feet to Bay 5. Nambiar looked up from the monitor. Bay 3? Small hemothorax developing, left base. He needs a chest tube and he needs it soon rather than later. The effusion is small, but his respiratory mechanics are compensating, and compensation has a ceiling. Nambiar absorbed this in about 2 seconds. Can you place it? Nora looked at her. I know what your record says, Nambiar said. Not as a challenge, as a statement of what she had read and what she was choosing to act on. The agreement isn't signed yet by the board technically, but I'm the attending tonight and I'm asking you directly. Can you place it? Yes, Nora said. Then do it. I can't leave her. She glanced at the monitor above the Bay 5 patient, a young woman who was intubated and still and being kept alive by machines and Nambiar's steady attention. The CT read just came back. She's got a small subdural, neurosurgery is being paged, but her pressure is still unstable, and I think she's got an abdominal component we haven't identified yet. Go, Nora said. I've got Bay 3. She went back. She talked to Gary Tolliver while she worked. Not constantly, not falsely cheerful, but present. Maintaining the connection that made a person in pain feel less alone, which was not a small thing and she had never thought it was. She explained what she was doing in plain language. He asked 2 questions. She answered both of them honestly, including the one where the honest answer was, "This is going to hurt and there's no way around that, but it's going to hurt less than the alternative." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Becca assisted. The procedure took 9 minutes. It was not smooth. It was the unglamorous, effortful, technically demanding work of doing a precise thing in a non-ideal environment with a frightened patient. And there was a moment in the middle where Tolliver made a sound that he would probably be embarrassed about later, and Nora said, "You're doing fine, keep breathing, almost there," and meant it. When it was done, and the tube was draining, and his oxygen saturation began its climb, 89, 91, 93. Gary Tolliver put his head back on the pillow and closed his eyes and breathed, and the breathing was different, and he knew it was different, and the knowledge of it moved across his face in a way that she recognized from every time she had watched a person's body begin to recover from the specific indignity of being injured. "Better?" she said. "Yeah," he said. His voice was different too. "Yeah, a lot better." She stayed with him for another 10 minutes, monitoring, adjusting, making sure the drain was working correctly. Then she went to check Bay 5. The neurosurgery team had arrived. Nambiar was briefing them with the compressed efficiency of someone passing a baton cleanly. The Bay 5 patient, whose name Nora had not yet learned, whose face she had only seen in the context of tubes and monitors, was being prepared for transport to imaging for a follow-up scan before the neurosurgery team made their call. Nambiar came out of the bay and stood beside Nora in the hallway, and they both stood there for a moment in the particular silence of 2 people who have just been through something and are taking a breath before the next thing. "Her pressure stabilized," Nambiar said, "about 10 minutes ago. I think she had a small mesenteric bleed that resolved spontaneously, but we'll know more after imaging." "What's her name?" Nora said. Nambiar looked at her. "Lydia Marsh, 21. She was a site safety observer, first day on the job." Nora looked at the bay where Lydia Marsh was being prepared for transport. 21. First day. "Bay 3? Nambiar said. "Hemothorax draining, SATs at 94, he's stable. He should be admitted for monitoring tonight, but I don't think he needs surgery." Nambiar nodded slowly. Then she looked at Nora with the expression of someone who has been in this work long enough to know exactly what they just witnessed. "You place that tube in 30 minutes from identification to completed procedure." 9 minutes for placement, Nora said. The rest was prep and monitoring. "In a community ER at 10 o'clock at night with a conscious and frightened patient with no surgical backup." Nambiar was not saying it as praise, exactly. She was saying it as documentation, as the naming of a thing that was true. "Do you understand what you are, Nora? Do you understand what you actually are?" Nora looked at the floor for a moment, then at the bay, then at Nambiar. "I'm a nurse," she said. "A very well-trained one." Nambiar made a sound that was almost a laugh, brief, involuntary, the kind that comes when something is both absurd and completely accurate. "Yes," she said. "That's one way to put it." The rest of the shift, Nora stayed until 2 a.m., until the department had settled and all 4 patients were placed, was the particular kind of exhausting that felt clean. Not the exhaustion of suppression, of managing herself down to fit the space she'd been given. The exhaustion of actual output, of having run at something close to capacity and found the capacity real. She drove home in the December dark. The streets were empty and the city was quiet, and the cold had deepened into something serious, the kind of cold that made the air feel honest. She slept. Actually slept, the way she hadn't in weeks. Dreamless and complete and long enough that she woke disoriented before she remembered what day it was. December. The audit committee's preliminary report arrived 38 days after the panel. Farrow called her the morning it was released, before the official notification went to the parties. "It's complete," Farrow said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone delivering something they had worked very hard for. Comprehensive findings on all documented incidents, all 3 former employee cases, the full communication record, and it's unambiguous. Nora sat at her kitchen table with coffee. "Tell me." The committee found systematic misuse of the incident report process by Sandra Voss over a minimum 4-year period, 17 documented instances of false or misleading notations in employee records, 4 cases of direct interference with clinical outcome documentation, 3 cases where departure circumstances were materially misrepresented in official records. Farrow paused. The committee recommended immediate termination for cause, revocation of supervisory authority, and referral to the Oregon State Board of Nursing for a formal licensure review. Nora was quiet. The hospital's legal team accepted the committee's recommendations without contest, Farrow said. The termination was effective the day the report was finalized. Sandra Voss no longer works at Harlow General. There was no particular satisfaction in hearing it. That was what Nora noticed. She had expected something when this moment came, some release, some sense of the weight shifting. What she felt instead was something quieter and more specific. The recognition that an accurate thing had been put in the record, that the record was now correct, that the correction had happened through a process that was slow and imperfect and had required more people than just her to make it work, and that all of that was appropriate, because that was how correct things happened in the real world, not cleanly, not dramatically, but by accumulation. The 3 former employees, she said, corrected employment documentation being issued to all 3 within the next 30 days. The 2 who left nursing are in contact with the hospital's reentry facilitation team. Harlow General is covering credentialing costs for both of them as part of the settlement. Farrow paused. The one in Portland, Alicia Brond, she's already started the reentry process. She called me last week. She said she'd been offered a position at the clinic where she currently works, full scope, and she's deciding between that and coming back to emergency nursing. What did you tell her? I told her it was her decision and that both options were good ones. Farrow's voice was measured. She said something I thought you should hear. She said she'd been afraid for 2 years that she had been wrong, that her instincts had been off, that maybe she wasn't as good as she'd thought. And she said that reading the committee's report, seeing it written down that the documentation against her was false, that it wasn't evidence of her failures, she said it was like setting down something she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Nora held the phone and thought about what that felt like. She had some idea. "Is she okay?" she said. "She sounded okay," Farrow said. She sounded like someone who had just been given something back. The state health authority's submission went in 16 days after the preliminary report. Nora knew about it because Reeves called her personally when it was filed. Not because she had to, but because she had said she would, and she was, Nora had come to understand, a person who kept the things she said. "It's filed," Reeves said, "the full submission, with the audit findings and the documentary record. The authority's review process takes 6 to 9 months. We don't control what they find or what actions they take." "I know," Nora said. "I want you to know the board voted again before the submission went in, to confirm the decision, 5-2 this time." One more vote, Nora noted. One person had moved. "Watts?" she said. A brief pause. "Yes," Reeves said. Nora thought about Gerald Watts reading the email, so too good at the job they shouldn't have, for the second time in a board meeting, having already read it once, and deciding that it meant something different the second time. People were not static things. That was easy to forget when you were on the wrong end of an institution. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you," Reeves said back. "For the 3rd condition, that one was yours." The formal start date for Nora's new role was set for the 2nd week of January, enough time for the HR paperwork, the credentialing documentation, the scope of practice agreement to be signed by all required parties. The title on the agreement was still Advanced Practice Clinical Specialist, which was still an imperfect fit, but Nambiar had told her that 3 members of the medical staff committee were already in conversation about creating a formal designation that better reflected the hybrid role, and that the conversation had been initiated not by administration, but by the physicians themselves, which was the kind of thing that would not have happened 3 months ago. On the last day of December, Tomas drove up from wherever he had been. He did not explain, and she did not ask. And they sat in her apartment and ate takeout noodles, and he told her about Martinez in the dry, specific language of a man reporting on someone he cared about, which, for Tomas, was its own kind of eloquence. Martinez was in physical rehab. He was difficult with the therapists. He was eating too much and sleeping not enough, and he had called Tomas twice in the middle of the night to talk about nothing, which Tomas said was fine because that was what you did. "He wants to talk to you," Tomas said. "I know. I'll call him. He's not going to say what he means to say. He's going to say something else, and you're both going to know he means the other thing." "I know how Martinez communicates," she said. Tomas ate a forkful of noodles. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" He thought about it for a moment in the way he thought about things, which was genuinely, without hurrying. "Like you're standing in a room instead of next to it," he said. She looked at him. That was one of the more precise things Tomas had ever said to her, which was notable, because Tomas was precise with words the same way he was precise with everything else, carefully, only when it mattered. "Yeah," she said, "that's about right." Drummond called on New Year's Eve, in the early evening, before whatever he was doing for the rest of the night. The conversation was short because Drummond's conversations were always short when everything was settled, when the necessary things had been said. "Harlow General, January 10th, he said. "January 10th, she confirmed. "You nervous?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I'm not nervous." She paused. "That's actually the interesting thing. I've been nervous for 3 years about being seen, and now the idea of going in and being exactly what I am, on paper, in the record, with the scope of practice to match. I'm not nervous about that at all." "Because it fits," he said. "Because it fits," she said. "That's what it feels like when something is right," he said. Not with sentimentality, with the flat accuracy of a person who had been in enough wrong situations to recognize the distinction. "You've been carrying the wrong shape for a long time." She did not answer that immediately. She looked at her kitchen, her apartment, the photograph of Martinez on the counter. She thought about the specific weight of 3 years of managing herself into a smaller space than she was, and about the way that space had felt like safety and had actually been a kind of diminishment that she had accepted because she thought she deserved it. She had not deserved it. None of the people in Pharaoh's files had deserved it. The nurse in Portland who had stopped trusting herself had not deserved 2 years of quiet self-doubt. The woman who had left nursing entirely had not deserved to lose a career she had been trained for, and the thing that had been done to all of them had not required malice in every person around them, just indifference and silence, and the particular human tendency to accept the official version of events when the unofficial version was inconvenient. "Drummond," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you for coming to find me." A pause. "You would have found your way eventually," he said. "Maybe, but it would have taken longer, and it would have cost more." He was quiet for a moment. "You're welcome, Gam," he said, which was not something Drummond said easily or often, and she received it accordingly. The nursing board's formal response to Sandra Voss arrived in the second week of January, a coincidence of timing that Nora learned about from Pharaoh, not from any official notification, because it was not her proceeding to receive notification on. The board had opened a formal investigation into the licensure complaint submission process, not just Sandra Voss's complaint against Nora, but the underlying conduct it had been filed in service of. The investigation would run concurrent with the state health authority's review of the submission Harlow General had made. Sandra Voss's own nursing license was under active review. She had retained legal counsel. The process would take months. It would take months, and it would be uncomfortable, and it would be public in the specific way that professional license proceedings were public, and the documentation that Pharaoh's team had assembled would be part of the record that the board's investigators worked from. It would not be fast. It would not be clean. It would be the grinding, imperfect, sometimes infuriating process of institutions doing the work they existed to do when enough pressure was applied in the right places. Nora had learned in the last 2 months to find something like peace with the slowness of that. The speed she had wanted, the immediate correction, the instant reversal, was not how real accountability moved. Real accountability moved like the audit committee, methodically, documented, with multiple parties reviewing the same record until the record could not be argued with. It was not satisfying in the way that movies were satisfying. It was satisfying in the way that true things were satisfying, which was a slower and more durable kind. Her first day at Harlow General in the new role was a Tuesday in January, cold and clear, the December rain finally gone, and a pale winter sun doing its best over Delwood. She parked in the staff lot. Her badge worked. The gate opened without drama, which was somehow the thing that felt most different. And she walked to the main entrance and through it, and she walked the hallway toward the ER with her actual badge on her chest that said her actual name and her actual designation, and she felt none of the edgewise invisibility that had been her consistent state for 3 years. She felt present, simply and completely present, in the way that happened when the inside and outside of a thing matched. Nambiar met her at the ER entrance, not with ceremony, with a cup of coffee, because Nambiar was practical that way, and because the department was already running and they were already needed. "Welcome back," Nambiar said. "Thank you for calling me in December," Nora said. "I needed the best person I had access to," Nambiar said simply. "That was you." She handed her the coffee. "Ready?" "Yes," Nora said. She went in. The department was what it always was. Loud and purposeful, and never quite under control and never quite out of it. The particular human ecosystem of a place where people came on the worst days of their lives, and other people tried to make the worst days survivable. She knew the rhythms of it. She knew the physical space, the supply locations, the monitor quirks in Bay 4 that required a specific angle on the probe. She knew Becca and the 3 other nurses she'd worked with in December, and she knew Holt, who nodded at her from Bay 2 with the particular nod of a man who had decided to spend his professional equity differently going forward. She did not know everything. She did not know all the staff, did not know every physician on the current rotation, did not know the specific protocols that had been updated in her absence. She would learn them. She would ask when she didn't know, and offer when she did, and she would do it without apology or performance in either direction. At 11 in the morning, a young woman came into the department, a new hire, 3rd week, wearing the fresh-pressed scrubs of someone who had not yet learned that scrubs should be comfortable rather than neat. She was standing at the nurse's station looking at a patient chart with the particular expression of someone who had noticed something and was deciding whether to say it. Nora came up beside her. "What are you looking at?" The young woman looked up, startled. I was just checking the chart for bed 7. The BP numbers. They've been drifting for the last hour and nobody's noted it, and I wasn't sure if it was my place to... "Is the patient in bed 7 your patient?" Nora said. "Yes." "Then it's absolutely your place." She looked at the chart. The drift was real. Not dramatic, but real. The kind of gradual change that could be noise or could be the beginning of something. "Tell me what you're thinking." The young woman, her badge said C. Varga, RN, took a breath. "I think she might be retaining fluid from the medication adjustment this morning. Her ankles looked different at my last check. I think someone should look at it." "Then say so," Nora said. "Say it clearly. Say it to the right person, and don't walk away until someone responds." Varga looked at her. "What if they dismiss it?" Nora looked back at her, and she thought about a trauma bay 3 weeks ago, and about a medication catch in a hallway 4 years ago that a young nurse she'd never met had been watching. She thought about Alicia Brond in Portland, who was finishing her re-entry paperwork and had texted Nora 2 weeks ago to say she had accepted a position and was going back. She thought about the 2 nurses who had left the profession and were deciding whether to return to it, and about what it had cost them to be made to doubt the thing they were trained to know. "Then say it to the next person," Nora said, "and the next one, and keep saying it until someone hears you. Your instincts were trained for this. They are not decoration." She paused. "And if you run into a wall you can't move, you come find me." Varga looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone receiving something they had not expected. Then she straightened. "Okay," she said. She went to find the right physician, and she said what she needed to say. And the physician ordered a medication adjustment, and the patient in bed 7's blood pressure stopped drifting by early afternoon. Varga did not make a big thing of it. She noted it in the chart and moved on. The way you did when you were learning that doing the right thing was not an event but a practice, not a single moment but a series of them, daily and undramatic and necessary. Nora watched her from across the department and felt something she could not have named exactly, something that had pride in it and recognition and the specific quality of understanding that the most durable form of what she had been through was not the vindication itself, but what happened after it. In the ordinary days, in the small moments where the lessons of difficult things got passed forward. She thought about everything it had taken to get here, the 3 years of managed invisibility. The single moment in a trauma bay when she had said the true thing out loud because a man's life required it. The process that had followed, slow, grinding, imperfect, dependent on Nambiar's counterstatement and Holt's amended notes, and Drummond's persistence and Farrow's 30 years of doing this work, and Reeves casting the vote that mattered. None of it had been simple. None of it had been guaranteed. There had been a dozen points at which it could have gone differently, where a single piece of the record had been missing, or a single person had chosen silence instead of documentation. The lesson was not that truth always won. The lesson was that truth required people willing to carry it, and that the most important thing you could do, when you knew something true, was refuse to let it become the thing nobody said. She had learned that from the wrong side of it. She knew its cost. And she intended to spend the rest of her career making sure the people around her understood that the cost of speaking was always lower than the cost of staying quiet, even when it didn't feel that way, especially then. At the end of her shift, she stood in the break room with a cup of coffee that she actually had time to drink, and Holt came in for a moment, between patients, coat still on, moving fast. And he stopped when he saw her, and there was a brief pause where they were just two people who had been through something and were standing in a break room on the other side of it. "How was the first day?" he said. "Good," she said. "Productive." He nodded. He poured coffee without sitting down, the way he always did. He started to leave, then stopped at the door. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "when I asked why you didn't speak up sooner. You said you had been managing the situation." "I said something like that." "I do that too," he said. "Manage," instead of saying the thing directly. He looked at the cup in his hand. "I'm working on it." She looked at him. Marcus Holt, who had not seen the tracheal deviation until she named it, who had not put his clinical findings in the official record until guilt made him, who had stood in a hallway 11 days after the panel and told her he was working on something. He was not a villain. He had never been. He was a person who had gotten comfortable, and comfort had made him slow. And slow had almost cost someone their life. He knew it. He was doing the imperfect work of knowing it. "Good," she said. He left. She finished her coffee. She walked out of the hospital at 6:40 in the evening through the main entrance, past the reception desk where the woman on duty knew her name and used it, out into the January dark where Delwood was doing what it did in winter. Cold, lit, alive with the ordinary traffic of a city going about its life. She stood on the front walk for a moment, her coat on, the cold air clean against her face. She thought about the broken side entrance she had pushed with her shoulder for 3 years. She thought about the locker room and the worn scrubs and the lunch bag with the torn zipper and the careful smallness of a life shaped around not being found. She thought about Drummond saying stop hiding in her apartment doorway, and about what she had almost said back, and about the long distance between almost saying something and the thing actually being true. She was not hiding. She was not managing herself into the corner of a room she was afraid to fill. She was standing in a department where her name was on the record, her training was on the record. Her clinical judgment had been formally validated and documented and submitted to the state health authority as part of an account that might help someone she would never meet avoid the same 4 years she had just come through. She was not finished. There was more work ahead. The audit's full findings, the state review, the 3 former employees finding their way back to the profession, the young nurses coming up behind them who needed to understand that their instincts were worth defending. The work was not clean, and it was not over, and she had not emerged from it unscathed or without cost. But she was standing in it, fully, publicly, without apology or diminishment. She started walking toward the parking lot. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Alicia Brond in Portland. One line. First day back in the ER next Monday. Thought you should know. Nora stopped walking. She read it twice. Then she typed back, standing in the January dark outside the hospital where none of this had been supposed to happen, where a man's vital signs had told the truth when everyone else had been looking somewhere else. You're going to be excellent, she wrote. Trust what you know. She sent it. She put her phone in her pocket. She walked to her car, got in, and drove home through the winter city, through the ordinary streets, past the ordinary lights, through the specific and unremarkable beauty of a Tuesday night in a place where people were living their lives. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could account for, like a person who was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, with her whole self present and accounted for, and finally, taking up the right amount of room. Some people spend years making themselves smaller to survive inside a system that doesn't know what to do with them. They learn to edit, to hold back, to route their knowledge through channels that were never built to carry it. They get good at survival, and they mistake it for living. They carry the weight of what they know without the outlet to use it. And over time, that weight stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like the normal pressure of being a person, and they forget that it was never supposed to be this heavy. This is what institutions do to people who don't fit the existing container. Not always deliberately, not always with malice, sometimes with the simple, devastating efficiency of a system protecting its own shape. The answer is not to become smaller. The answer is never to become smaller. It is to find the people who can see what you carry, to build, or to find, the record that tells the truth. To say the true thing once, and then again, and then as many times as it takes, because the moment you stop saying it, you hand the official version to the people who were wrong, and the official version has a way of becoming permanent if nobody contests it. Nora Callahan had spent 3 years making herself small enough to fit inside a space that had never been built for her. And then one night, in a trauma bay, a man's body had told the truth, whether she said it out loud or not. And she had chosen to say it. That choice had cost her something. It had also given everything back. Not because the world rewarded courage automatically, not because the system always corrected itself, but because enough people, in enough moments, had chosen to put the true thing in the record. And records, once made, have a way of surviving the people who wanted them buried. She had been the nurse everyone ignored. She had become the record nobody could argue with. And on a Tuesday night in January, driving home through the winter city with her whole self intact, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.